Chapter 184. Before that day, Lu Chen had never known about this strange and mysterious place in Kunlun Mountain. Sometimes, when he thought about it, he felt that the martyr's grave really was a very strange place. In a famous sect like the Kunlun Party, this kind of secular thing should not exist, but it did, and it seemed to have a very long history. In the past, Lu Chen had never heard a word or two about the martyr's grave from anyone. It seemed that everyone had ignored this place, just like the dusky shadow that always shrouded the area around the martyr's grave. The martyr's grave had always been out of people's sight. People did not know about it, but it had always existed. In fact, there were many similar things in the world. There were many people and things that we had never seen or heard of, so we thought that it was impossible. Even if we accidentally discovered something, we would certainly use our own imagination to speculate what that thing looked like. Of course, Lu Chen would not be like this. Compared to the vast majority of cultivators in the cultivation world, the current him might be weak on the surface, but his experience and knowledge, after seeing too many people and things, had long made him understand this truth. He was indeed surprised by the sudden appearance of the martyr's grave, but what he should do was not speculate, but carefully investigate. Abnormalities were demons, and the martyr's grave in Kunlun Mountain really seemed a bit too strange and abrupt. However, if it was really just a place that took in ownerless corpses, even if he had some doubts, he might not necessarily take the risk. The most important reason why he sneaked into the nameless mountain this night was of course because he saw He come here that day. He, this person, was now like a venomous snake hiding in the darkness, coldly and desperately searching for the whereabouts of the murderer. And coming to the martyr's grave must also be, because he seemed to have discovered something here. What exactly did he obtain from the martyr's grave? Lu Chen was determined to get to the bottom of this. The shadow's patience was certainly unquestionable, but no one could question the shadow's ability to act. It was just like the battle in the desolate valley 10 years ago. No one had ever given him an order, and no one had ever told him what to do. However, at the most dangerous and critical moment, he had still acted decisively. His figure quickly moved forward in the darkness, but for some reason, perhaps because the night wind was too cold, he suddenly felt a chill in his chest. In the blink of an eye, it had been 10 years since he last saw her. That once beautiful face, along with the passage of time, seemed to be like all the memories in the world, gradually becoming blurry in his memory. The only thing that was still clearly engraved in his heart was her name. The curfew of the Kunlun Party was an ancient rule. No one knew how many years it had lasted, including all the Yuanying Jinren. This rule had existed since the first time everyone climbed the Kunlun Mountain. Perhaps it was really decided by Kuan Yuanzi and Tai Luo? But what was the point of setting a curfew? Lu Chen did not know. In fact, during his days on the Kunlun Mountain, when night fell completely, he had secretly left his house several times and moved stealthily in the darkness. It was also because of this that he felt particularly confused about the curfew on the Kunlun Mountain. Every time he sneaked out late at night, almost all the places he passed by at night on the Kunlun Mountain did not have any thieves. Everyone was in awe of the Kunlun Party. He had walked many times on those lonely mountain paths at night. But nothing had happened, and there was nothing strange or incomprehensible. The night in the Kunlun Mountain was no different from the night in other places. Perhaps there was something strange about the occasional patrolling disciple? Then wasn't this curfew the most stupid rule? But all the disciples of the Kunlun sect still passed down this rule from generation to generation. It was not easy for Lu Chen to understand this, but he could shut his mouth and think about the era of the two patriarchs thousands of years ago. Every time it was late at night on the Kunlun Mountain, some strange existences would run out and threaten the lives of the disciples of the sect. But now, thousands of years later, those dangers seemed to have disappeared without a trace. Or maybe they were just sealed and suppressed in the most mysterious, heaviest, and tightest place under the Kunlun Mountain. Lu Chen, who was stealthily moving in the darkness, suddenly stopped. He stood in the shadows and frowned, as if he was thinking about something carefully. After a while he suddenly turned around and looked into the distance. That direction was the deepest part of the Kunlun mountain range. There was also a legendary forbidden area there, which was the foundation of the Kunlun Party. Even spiritual master Yuanying could not easily approach it. The only people who could control that dark area were the two peerless deity. Lu Chen's eyes gradually lit up. For a long time, everyone had been guessing what was in the forbidden area in the sky. This time, it seemed that Lu Chen had also thought of this. Lu Chen did not know what the evil sex spy saw in the Kunlun party, so it was very difficult to trace this person. But at this moment, he suddenly had a feeling that the spy came for a certain secret, and the biggest secret of the Kunlun mountain was probably what was in that forbidden area. One had to walk step by step, rice had to be eaten bite by bite. Even if there was a new suspicion in his heart, Lu Chen still came to the martyr's grave again. There was an extremely resourceful corpse watcher here. During the day, Lu Chen had already sensed that this person's skills were extraordinary, and he had actually almost found him. The reason why he insisted on coming to this unpleasant place was probably because he wanted to get some information from the corpse watcher. In the dark night, the martyr's grave seemed to be darker than during the day. There was a feeling of not being able to see the fingers of one's hand. The black courtyard was like a giant beast, silently lying in this boundless darkness. Lu Chen waited in the darkness for a long time, and then slowly approached. But until he was near the tightly shut door, there was no movement in the black courtyard. Lu Chen was hesitating whether he should investigate further or not. Suddenly, a gust of cold wind blew past. The black door not far in front of him suddenly opened by itself. A candle lit up. It was the withered corpse watcher who suddenly came to the side of the door, holding a candle in his left hand. With the help of the flame, Lu Chen clearly saw this person's expression. He seemed to be a little cold, and had no intention of talking to anyone. After looking around, he suddenly said faintly, "Please show yourself, esteemed guest. If there's nothing else, then I'll be going back to sleep." Lu Chen quietly watched the corpse's figure, hiding in the darkness. He did not say a word. Even his breathing was quiet. The corpse watcher waited for a while, then turned around and walked back into the courtyard. The black door behind him closed with a creak. Lu Chen looked down at his own body. He did not find anything unusual, but he could not understand why he had fallen for this a few times in the past 2 days. The corpse watcher seemed to always be able to notice something was wrong in advance, but it seemed like he could not really pinpoint the enemy, so it was a little awkward. So now, should he go over? He stood in the darkness outside the righteous grave for 2 hours. He did not rashly walk forward. He only raised his head and looked out into the distance, looking at the majestic mountain peaks and the topography of this place. Before the 4th hour arrived, he suddenly turned around and left. At this time, the sky was still pitch black, but to be precise, another day had already passed. There were still 20 days until the next full moon. Lu Chen quietly left the righteous grave area. But what he did not know was that when he left, in the dark courtyard, the corpse watcher did not go to sleep like he said he would, but stood alone in the middle of the courtyard, as if he was listening to something. When Lu Chen left outside, the corpse watcher finally let out a sigh of relief. He raised his head to look at the sky, suddenly muttering to himself, "These few years the Kunlun party has produced many geniuses. Their future is really limitless." Lu Chen took advantage of the night to leave, ready to rush back to Flying Goose platform before daybreak. Although it was unlikely that Su Qingjun would come out to patrol so early in the morning, that woman actually had a very strange and funny little quirk. She especially liked to sleep. On the night that Su Qingjun was seriously injured, Lu Chen had once entered her cave residence. Although later on, no matter who it was, he was very tight-lipped, saying that he had never entered her cave residence. But on that night, Lu Chen did see something that he should not have seen. Su Qingjun seemed to have a rather split personality. She was dignified and beautiful in front of others, but actually a little lazy in private. Lu Chen still clearly remembered that when he entered that day, he saw that the bed in Su Qingjun's cave residence was very clean. Everything was very tidy. Only the quilt was not folded. When he thought of these things in his heart, he was secretly a little amused, but perhaps Su Qingjun had warned him, so he had always kept his mouth shut about this matter. But sometimes when he thought of it, he would still laugh, thinking that if Su Qingjun got married in the future, would she still be able to avoid her husband at that time? In the dark night, the wind was strong, and the mountain path was long, but his footsteps were light and quick. Suddenly, from an unknown place in the depths of the darkness, a strange sound came abruptly, like the mouth of a ferocious beast, but also like the sound of a hungry wolf drooling. Lu Chen's footsteps suddenly stopped. In the darkness ahead, in this quiet night of Kunlun Mountain that seemed to have been peaceful and quiet for thousands of years, there were 3 green lights in the shape of a triangle. As if there were 3 eyes on a head, incomparably strange appeared in front of him. Chapter 185. In the darkness, the shape of the monster's body could not be seen clearly. Only those 3 strange green eyes stared intently at Lu Chen. At that moment, Lu Chen almost subconsciously thought of Atsu. In the past, in the middle of the night, Atsu's eyes also had a similar fire-like glow. But the 2 were different. Lu Chen quickly made this judgment. Although Atsu's eyes were green, the luster in them was clean and bright. Although it looked a little gloomy in the dark, one could still feel the change of emotion in them. There was that kind of vitality. The emerald green eyes that suddenly appeared in front of him were much stronger than Atsu's eyes. They were like 3 burning green flames that were filled with a brutal and cruel aura. As if there was only the intention to kill left. For some reason, after seeing this clearly, Lu Chen secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Then his face quickly sank. He frowned and looked at the strange monster that suddenly appeared in the dark. Of course, this thing was not a kind creature. Just the brutal aura that came from the dark was enough to make him categorize it as one of the most ferocious creatures he had ever seen in his life. Almost all the creatures that he had seen in the past were in the most dangerous places in this vast land of China, which was the depths of the land of chaos. But this place was clearly the Kunlun Mountain, the spiritual mountain of the Western land, the mountain base of the Kunlun party. How could there be such a ferocious monster? Many questions flashed in Lu Chen's mind, but he did not think too much about it. Because after the strange emerald green eyes confronted him for a moment, the monster seemed to be unable to suppress its desire for flesh and blood. It let out an ear-piercing shriek and suddenly rushed over. The sound of the monster breaking through the air was incomparably sharp, like an arrow that had been released from a bow. Because of the monster's movement, Lu Chen vaguely saw a little of the monster's appearance. It looked like a strange snake-like insect. It was half the length of an arm, and its body was only as thick as a thumb. However, it had a strange head the size of a fist. The most eye-catching and most terrifying 3 green eyes were on the top of the monster's head. The whistling sound seemed to carry darkness with it as it rushed over. Lu Chen's face was as calm as still water. He took a step back and flipped his right palm. A black short sword appeared in his hand, and he slashed it down. However, the strange insect's speed was so fast that it actually made a turn in midair and avoided the sharp blade. It even took advantage of the situation and flipped up from the blade. In an instant, it curled around Lu Chen's wrist. Then, it lowered its head and directly bit Lu Chen's wrist. These few movements were incomparably fast. The strange insect's speed was frighteningly fast, and Lu Chen couldn't react for a moment. He only felt a sudden sharp pain in his wrist, and at that moment, he seemed to hear another kind of frightening sound. It was the sound of skin tearing and flesh scraping against bones. It was the sound of the terrifying strange insect devouring flesh and blood in a frenzy. Moreover, almost in an instant, the strange insect actually wriggled madly. Then it directly drilled into the wound it had bitten, directly entering into Lu Chen's arm. A terrifying pain surged up from his arm like a tide. Lu Chen's palm trembled violently. At that moment, he instantly lost control of his right hand. His fingers loosened powerlessly, and the black short sword fell to the ground. And in the dim light in the darkness, he could even see a twisted and terrifying scar bulging on his skin. It was desperately twisting, constantly rushing up his arm. It seemed that in a short moment, the strange insect would rush through his shoulder blade and straight into his chest to gnaw at his heart, lungs, and 5 internal organs. In this dark night, it was suddenly filled with infinite terrifying killing intent. It was as if the whole world had turned into a sheet of ice. Lu Chen suddenly snorted coldly. A dark flame suddenly lit up from the depths of his eyes. At the same time, in the most secret depths of his body, the quiet and lonely 5 elements divine plate suddenly trembled violently, and then suddenly flipped over. The black divine plate appeared again. That dot of black flame burned in his chi-si. In an instant, the black flame flourished. The strange insect in his arm suddenly stopped. It seemed that in that instant, it also felt something. Even in front of his flesh and blood, this strange insect unexpectedly showed a trace of inexplicable fear. It actually had some intention of retreating. However, the darkness had arrived. Like a roar on a boundless dark sea, the endless darkness instantly boiled up and crazily surged towards Lu Chen's body from all directions. The cold wind blew and the darkness whistled. It was like a crazy dance, surrounding the cluster of dark flame in the deepest depths of the shadow. An ice-cold aura dispersed in all directions. There was no longer the slightest mercy or anger. A terrifying and murderous aura suddenly rose from Lu Chen's body. It rolled back and directly rushed from his body towards the strange insect's right arm. The dark flame flickered in this tidal wave. It was like a ferocious smile opening the mouth of an evil spirit to devour all living beings. This murderous aura was even more tyrannical, more terrifying, and more merciless than the aura that the strange insect had just revealed. That strange insect's tyrannical aura seemed to crazily devour flesh and blood. But the murderous aura in Lu Chen's body seemed to be born purely for killing. It wanted to destroy everything and wipe out all the vitality of all living beings. In the darkness, Lu Chen opened his eyes and stood upright. His body suddenly shook. Then countless black flames suddenly gushed out from his body, burning wildly. But the strange thing was that his clothes were not damaged at all. He looked like a burning man made of black fire. The strange insect suddenly trembled violently, and then it retreated madly. However, it was already too late. The tide of darkness was like a monstrous wave that surged into the heavens, and it charged directly into Lu Chen's right arm. After that, it drowned the strange insect that was hidden within his flesh. Everything, in an instant, was silent. After the tide, the world was as quiet as before. Only Lu Chen's body was still standing in the darkness, gently gasping for breath. After a moment, he slowly raised his right hand, and then gently shook it. With a pata, a small piece of burnt black shrunk to the size of a little finger, as hard as a rock, fell out from his wound. Then it heavily hit the ground and rolled twice. The night wind was cold, blowing past his body. Lu Chen felt a chill from his forehead, neck, and back. Only now did he discover that in that instant, his entire body was covered in cold sweat. The black flames were still burning in his eyes. The tide of darkness was still surging in his body. He gently gasped for breath, feeling a trace of trembling. The surging black flames gradually calmed down. Then they slowly retreated, shrinking back into his body. The night once again calmed down. Even the darkness became gentle, gently clustered around him, comforting his body. But at this time, in the strange black tide that was gradually returning to the energy sea, Lu Chen suddenly felt a trace of a different aura. It was a new aura with a murderous and tyrannical aura. It was the aura that the black flames had plundered after killing the strange insect. In the past, when he had this strange black disc, every time he killed a living being, a trace of a similar aura would be absorbed into the black flames on the black disc. Then, it would nourish and strengthen the black flames. Lu Chen didn't understand it, nor did he like this sort of feeling. It was even to the extent that he faintly had the feeling that if this continued, then he would probably sink into this terrifying slaughter one day and be doomed eternally. Therefore, after that, he rarely killed living beings, unless it was absolutely necessary, and when he had to protect himself. But this night, the aura he felt was completely different from the previous slaughter. The murderous aura that had been plundered was strong and abundant, almost 10 times stronger than any slaughter in the past. And after absorbing this strong new power, the black flames on the black disc in Lu Chen's energy seemed to instantly grow larger. In that dark world, it burned quietly, as if it was showing a mocking smile to the owner of this body. Lu Chen stood in place in silence for a long time. Then he closed his eyes. After a long time, when he opened his eyes again, the black flames had disappeared. The surrounding night wind had cooled down and was no longer harsh. It blew through the forest as if nothing had happened in the night. Lu Chen took a step forward and squatted down. There was a black thing on the ground. He picked up the black dagger that had fallen to the side and gently fiddled with it. After confirming that there was nothing strange, He picked it up again. This was the remains of that strange insect. Under the burning of the terrifying and violent black flames in his body, this strange insect had almost no ability to resist, and was directly killed. Then its entire body was instantly incinerated, leaving only some of the hardest residue that was gathered together and turned into this black and hard stone. Of course, the strange green eyes were gone, but when Lu Chen's finger slowly brushed across this black stone, he could still vaguely feel some soul-stirring patterns and traces. The residue of the bones and sharp teeth had fused together. It was hard to imagine that not long ago, this thing was still in the flesh, like a bloodthirsty demon. Why would there be such a terrible and cruel monster in the Kunlun Mountains? No matter how one looked at it, it was impossible for this kind of thing to appear in the Kunlun Mountains. There were 2 deity transformation stage perfected cultivators, dozens of Yuanying stage perfected cultivators, and more powerful cultivators. There were about 100,000 people in the famous sections. Any slightly more ferocious demon beasts had long been driven away. And Lu Chen was very sure that he had never heard of this kind of thing. No one in the Kunlun party had ever mentioned it. It seemed that no one had ever known that this kind of monster that suddenly appeared in the night had only appeared out of thin air tonight. Where did it come from? Lu Chen's brows were tightly furrowed. His palm tightly grasped the charred remains of the stone. He looked into the distance, only to see the shadows of the distant mountains. The darkness seemed to be everywhere. Chapter 186. That morning, when Lu Chen walked out of his wooden hut with a yawn, he saw a man standing with his hands behind his back on the quiet Fian terrace, not far from his wooden hut. He looked to be in his 40s or 50s. He had a refined bearing and a calm expression. Perhaps it was because of his age. There were already some stars on his temples, but it could still be seen that he was still in the prime of his life. The man stood there, looking at the sea of clouds beyond the cliff. Then he turned around and saw Lu Chen. He smiled calmly and quietly, nodding at Lu Chen and saying, "Hello." "Yes, hello. May I ask who you are, senior?" Lu Chen tried to recall, but he had no impression of this person before, so he asked politely. The man walked toward him and stopped a few feet away from Lu Chen. He wasn't too close to make it awkward, but he wasn't too far away to make it seem rude. He looked Lu Chen up and down, then nodded and said with a smile, "You must be Lu Chen?" I am Lu Chen. Do you know me, senior?" Lu Chen was a little surprised. The man smiled and said, "Oh, I don't think we've met before. Let me introduce myself. My surname is Su, and my name is Tianhe." "Su Tianhe." Lu Chen repeated the name in his heart. Suddenly his expression changed. He looked at the man's face again, and found him familiar. There were some similarities between him and Su Qingjun. He was surprised and said, "Could you be from the Su family?" Su Tianhe smiled and nodded. "I can be considered the head of the Su family, and also Qingjun's father." Lu Chen was speechless. He didn't expect the head of the Su family to come to the Fian terrace alone so early in the morning. But judging from Su Tianhe's extraordinary bearing, he was completely different from the young people in his family. At this moment, Su Tianhe's gaze swept over Lu Chen's face. After a while he sighed and said, "Brother Lu, I didn't teach my son well and wasn't strict enough with my subordinates, causing you to suffer. This is all the fault of the Su family. I apologize in advance." After saying that, he solemnly cupped his hands and bowed to Lu Chen. Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and a strange light flashed in his eyes, but he quickly stepped aside and said, "Senior, please don't do this. I don't deserve it." Su Tianhe smiled at Lu Chen and said, "Brother Lu is reasonable and an outstanding person. I believe you are also a broad-minded person." As he said that, he stepped forward and stuffed a cloth bag into Lu Chen's hand, saying, "There are some rare spiritual materials in this bag. They are probably worth thousands of spiritual stones. It's just a small token of my appreciation, but it can't make up for the guilt in my heart. Please accept it, Brother Lu. For the sake of my old face, please don't hold a grudge against our Su clan." As he said that, he looked at Lu Chen with a sincere expression. Lu Chen's face also showed some fear and nodded, saying, "Senior Su, you are too polite. How can I accept this?" As he said those polite words, Lu Chen was about to push the cloth bag out, but his fingers tightened on the cloth bag. Su Tianhe glanced at the cloth bag, and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He was determined to give it to Lu Chen. The two pushed for a while, but in the end, Lu Chen reluctantly accepted it and thanked Su Tianhe with a happy face. After joking for a while, Su Tianhe and Lu Chen seemed to be chatting very congenially. Su Tianhe glanced at the cave on the other side and turned to Lu Chen, saying, "Brother Lu, I think it's getting late. Can you help me call Qing Jun and ask her to come out and meet me?" Lu Chen was slightly surprised and said, "Senior, you and she are father and daughter. Can't you just go and call her directly?" Su Tianhe sighed and said, "Brother Lu, you don't know. I was not at home a while ago. I heard that Qing Jun came back and quarreled with my wife and a few brothers. After that, we didn't contact each other for a few days. When I came back and heard about this, I immediately reprimanded them and then came up the mountain." Speaking up to here, he paused for a moment and then said sincerely, "In fact, what you said just now is also reasonable. Qing Jun and I are father and daughter. Everything can naturally be discussed. But I'm afraid that she is still angry and unwilling to see me. So I'll have to trouble Brother Lu." Lu Chen nodded and said, "So that's how it is. All right then, I'll help you call her. However, I have to warn you first that I don't dare to guarantee that she'll come out to see you herself." Su Tianhe laughed and looked relaxed, but there seemed to be a glimmer of light flashing in the depths of his eyes. He said with a smile, "Haha, it seems that Brother Lu really understands Qing Jun. Do you know that it's a little difficult to call her this morning?" Lu Chen was startled for a moment, then immediately shook his head and said with a smile, "No, no, no. Senior Su, you misunderstand. How would I know? I'm just afraid that a lowly odd-job disciple like me might not pay attention to young lady, Su, even if I call her. All right, wait a moment, I'll go call her for you." As he said this, he turned around and walked towards the stone door of the cave residence. The morning sun sprinkled down from the sky and shone on the faces of the two men. When Lu Chen turned his back to Su Tianhe, the smiles on their faces disappeared at the same time. The man's gaze was calm and somewhat cold, deep as the sea. Lu Chen stood in front of the stone door of the cave residence and began to loudly knock on the door. Occasionally he and Su Tianhe would look back and smile at each other and nod slightly, but after a long time, the stone door still didn't move. It seemed that Su Qingjun had no intention of coming out. Lu Chen touched his chest. There was still a yellow talisman stone lying there. It was the heart-burning talisman that Su Qingjun gave him when he planted the eagle fruit tree. She didn't take it back later on. So these days, if he wanted to find Su Qingjun, he wouldn't knock on the door like this. But now he had no intention of using the heart-burning talisman. After calling for a while, he turned back to look at Su Tianhe and said somewhat helplessly, "Senior, you see." Su Tianhe nodded and pondered for a moment before saying to Lu Chen, "In that case, it's not good for me to stay here for a long time. Moreover, I do have some things to do in the city below the mountain, so I can only leave first. Brother Lu, when you see Qingjun, please help me tell her that I've come to see her. We're all family, so there's nothing that can't be said. Ask her to come down the mountain to see me when she has time." Lu Chen responded and said, "Senior, rest assured, I will definitely pass on the message." Su Tianhe smiled and cupped his hands, then turned around and left. From the beginning to the end, he was elegant and approachable, completely different from the other Su family members that Lu Chen had seen before. He was a person that made it difficult for people not to have a good impression of him. Lu Chen's brows furrowed slightly as he watched his figure gradually disappear into the distance. As usual, Su Qingjun waited until the evening of this day before she slowly walked out of the cave residence and strolled around the Fian Terrace. Lu Chen saw her and told Su Qingjun about Su Tianhe's visit during the day. After listening, Su Qingjun was silent. The expression on her face looked a little complicated, faintly a little annoyed, but also a little guilty and ashamed. Lu Chen saw the change in her expression and did not say much. He just truthfully repeated Su Tianhe's words to her and then walked away. In that evening, Su Qingjun stood on the edge of the cliff and looked at the sea of clouds for a long time. The position where she stood was exactly where Su Tianhe stood during the day. "I heard that the most difficult thing to give up in this world is the affection between parents and children." Lu Chen said to Old Ma with emotion. Unfortunately, I have never felt this feeling since I was a child. I don't know if it's so deep and hard to give up. Old Ma smiled and said, Who said it isn't? But I didn't expect that you would tell that old man Su's words so honestly. I thought you would at least do something to it. Nonsense, I'm not that kind of person. Lu Chen said. Believe me you are. Old Ma said. He then lowered his head and dodged a cup that Lu Chen threw at him. Then he said with a smile, So as a result of this message, Su Qingjun went down the mountain and went home today? Lu Chen nodded and said, She has been a filial daughter of a noble family for 20 years. Her parents are still alive. How can she really break up with them? Moreover, don't underestimate Su Tianhe. I think he is very shrewd and not easy to deal with. He is much better than his useless nephews. Old Ma said with a and said, Yes, the Su family has been thriving these years, and Su Tianhe has contributed a lot. Lu Chen did not talk about this. They sat for a while and Lu Chen suddenly said, How many days until the next full moon night? Old Ma was startled and said, Why do you ask this? He said with a frown for a moment and then said, 19 days. Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said, Can the damn Baldi come back before that day? Old Ma's eyes narrowed and his face suddenly became serious. He stared at Lu Chen and said in a low voice, What's going on? Could it be that the spy has made a move? Lu Chen hesitated and said, I can't be completely sure. As he spoke, he told Old Ma about the mysterious symbol he found in the forest that day, and what he understood from it. In the end he said, Whether the traitor will appear that day or not, and whether he will meet me, I still can't say for sure. Old Ma thought for a moment and said, I will immediately report this to my lord, and then you come back in 3 days. How about it? Lu Chen nodded and said, Okay. Old Ma still showed a trace of joy on his face and said, If we can find the spy so smoothly, we will be relieved. Lu Chen smiled and said, What's wrong? Could it be that you originally wanted to search here for more than 10 years? Old Ma thought for a moment and said with a smile, I don't need more than 10 years, but I really thought that it might take at least a few years. The two smiled at each other. After a moment, Lu Chen seemed to ask him casually, Oh yes, you are quite knowledgeable. Have you heard of a strange insect with 3 green eyes, shaped like a small snake that devours flesh and blood? Chapter 187. Old Ma was stunned for a moment and said, What is it? Tell me in detail. Lu Chen told Old Ma about the appearance of the strange 3-eyed insect he saw last night in detail, but ignored the short but thrilling and extremely dangerous fight. Old Ma also frowned after hearing this. After pondering for a while, he shook his head and said, I have never heard of such a strange and ferocious creature in this world before. Well, I will help you check it later. Lu Chen knew that besides being well-informed, Old Ma also had all kinds of connections. For so many years he had no confidence in Old Ma, but his confidence in this aspect had never wavered. He nodded and said, Okay. Old Ma pondered for a moment, and suddenly showed a trace of doubt on his face. He looked at Lu Chen and said, Strange. This kind of monster is so cruel, and it must have killed many people. How could it appear in a place like Kunlun Mountain? Lu Chen also nodded and said, Yes, I also thought of this last night, but I also couldn't figure it out. And I've been on the mountain for so long, but I've never heard of anyone talking about this kind of monster before. Even earlier, there was no news about it. It should have just appeared suddenly. Old Ma's face suddenly darkened, and he lowered his voice and said softly, Is it really so coincidental? Could it be that someone has their eyes on you? Lu Chen also fell silent. After a moment he said, It shouldn't be. At present, the Su family was the only one who was unhappy with me. However, with Su Qingjun around, they wouldn't dare to act recklessly. Not to mention that Su Tianhe had personally come to the Flying Goose Terrace once. It was obvious that he wanted to ease the relationship between father and daughter. At this critical moment, they won't act recklessly. Old Ma nodded slowly and said, What you said makes sense, but I always feel that there may be some undercurrent surging in Kunlun Mountain recently. You should be careful. Lu Chen grunted in acknowledgement, then glanced at him and said, What do you mean by undercurrents? Explain it clearly. Could it be that you've heard some rumors recently? Old Ma hesitated for a moment and said, I did hear some news before. It said that there is someone in the Kunlun party, well, at the level of Immortal Yuanying, who is dissatisfied with the current leader, Immortal Idol Month. Lu Chen raised his eyebrows, and his expression suddenly became serious. He said softly, Really? Old Ma nodded and said, Most likely true. Lu Chen did not ask Old Ma where this news came from. Years of friendship and getting along with each other had long made him understand the propriety of this matter. Moreover, he also believed that since Old Ma dared to tell him this news, it was most likely confirmed. He pondered for a moment and suddenly laughed, but his voice was still low. He said, questioning the current leader, Immortal Idol Month, and there is a perfected cultivator of deity transformation above him, which Immortal Yuanying is so bold to do so. Will there be any good consequences in the future? Logically speaking, it shouldn't be. Which big shot in that realm is simple. Each of them should be as cunning as a fox. Old Ma smiled and said, Logically speaking, maybe so. Lu Chen looked at him, and his eyes suddenly lit up. A trace of a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He said, That is to say, there must be something unreasonable in this. Let me think, all the principles in this world can only be justified if there is a foundation. But on Kunlun Mountain, those who can face Immortal Idol Month, including that Hakushin Jinkuan, are all qualified to be unreasonable. Those Yuanying Zenrins are not enough. Old Ma smiled and said nothing. Lu Chen shook his head and sighed. He said, Damn Baldy, can't hold it in any more? Old Ma shrugged and said, I think it's not that he can't hold it in anymore. It's just that most of the adults are in Zhengxianmeng now, and few are in the sect. Hakushin Jinkuan Mountain is the strongest on Kunlun Mountain. He probably needs to find a few opportunities to make a statement and show his existence. Lu Chen nodded and said, That makes sense. No wonder those Yuanying Zenrins dare to say such strange things. They have a backer behind them. Are those two from Baichao Tang's sect who are talking? Old Ma said, I heard that there are 3 or 4 of them, but the loudest ones should be Qiandang and Mingzhu Zhenren. And they do have a good reason to do so. After all, this time their excuse is related to Baichao Tang's sect. Lu Chen was stunned. He said, What's their excuse? Old Ma smiled and said, Last time, a demon from the devil cult assassinated a servant disciple of Kunlun party. After many days of investigation, there was still no news. Naturally, Baichao Tang's sect will complain. I think even Zhenren Idol Month can't say anything about it. Lu Chen was silent for a moment. He said, Good move. On this day both Su Qingjun and Lu Chen went down the mountain. Flying Goose Terrace was deserted. Except for the cave residence with the closed stone door. There was only a lonely wooden house with a black dog inside. Atsu seemed to be completely used to living in Flying Goose Terrace. Every day after waking up, it would walk around Flying Goose Terrace like a king inspecting his territory. From time to time, it would find a corner or a tree root to pee. Originally, it would run to the cave residence's stone door to do this, but under Su Qingjuan's strong protest and Lu Chen's scolding, Atsu cleverly avoided that area. But sometimes, when it looked at the stone wall, there was still a hint of regret in its one eye. Flying Goose Terrace was a secluded place. Usually, people rarely came here. There were no fierce beasts in the forest, but there were many birds. Usually, the birds' clear and melodious chirping added a bit of fairy-like atmosphere to the place. After Atsu patrolled around, it walked to the cliff and lay on the ground, staring blankly at the sea of clouds in the distance. In the past, whenever it was free during the day, Atsu would not stay alone like this. It would often run out into the forest to play, cross mountains and rivers, and run to its heart's content. At that time, it even liked to go to the strange Doghead Mountain to look for the giant oxen, and see the layers of strange beasts on the mountain. Those days seemed to be just yesterday. Back then, Atsu was happy and full of energy every day. But now it was different. Atsu no longer looked for oxen, and it no longer went to the Doghead Mountain. It even rarely entered the forest. Even if it ran into the forest, it would at most stay near Flying Goose Terrace. It would not go any further. All these changes stemmed from that heart-wrenching and cruel tyranny. It was so badly injured that it almost lost its life. It was so badly injured that it was filled with fear ever since. Since that dark night, Atsu almost no longer trusted anyone other than Luchin. Perhaps Exian was an exception. It also stopped looking for the strange beasts in the forest. When it recovered and went to the Doghead Mountain again, Atsu found that the strange beasts looked at it in a different way. The respect they once had was gone. Instead, it was replaced by mockery, contempt, mockery, and ferocity. Who would look up to a dog that was covered in wounds and had only one eye and half of its tail left? When it passed by, the tiger roared at it. The crane pecked its head with its beak. The monkey grabbed a branch and swung it across the sky, reaching out to grab half of the dog's tail and laughing crazily. There were even more beasts that looked on coldly. No matter how the black dog wailed, they were indifferent. Occasionally, when the dog fell in front of them, they would kick it. In all the forests in the world, the strong preyed on the weak. If the strong were to be respected, who would sympathize with you when you were crippled and suffer? Atsu once looked up at the peak of the mountain. The huge figure was lying there as usual. It looked like it was sleeping, but it also looked like it could not be bothered to care about these trivial things. After that, Atsu left that place and never returned. Since then, it stayed by Luchen's side even more. Even if it was a dark night, it would curl up next to Luchen to sleep. That day, the sun was warm. It shone on the sea of clouds and the black dog's body. Atsu yawned lazily and lowered its head to the ground. It felt a little bored. It glanced at the mountain path that led down from the Flying Goose platform. There was no one on the mountain path. It knew that there was still some time before Luchen returned. A few crisp chirps of birds came from the forest. Atsu thought for a while, then got up and walked toward the back of the mountain. It seemed to have a love for the forest in its body. It liked the feeling of being in the forest. Walking into the forest behind the Flying Goose platform, there were old trees and vines that had grown for many years everywhere. The air was filled with a fresh scent, which made Atsu feel much better. It sniffed everywhere, and seemed to be happy. Even its footsteps became lighter. Just like that, it walked and stopped, running and jumping. The changing light and shadow in the quiet forest was like a paradise that belonged only to the black dog. Suddenly, Atsu stopped in its tracks. It raised its head and stared ahead with its only eye. There was a big rock next to a big tree over there. A figure stood under the rock. At that moment, it heard the noise and turned to look. When its gaze swept across Atsu, it smiled. It was White Lotus. This mysterious and beautiful fairy-like girl suddenly appeared in the forest behind the Flying Goose terrace. At first glance, she seemed to be a beautiful fairy in this emerald green forest, but for some reason, there seemed to be a trace of an indescribably strange aura about her. She smiled and waved at Atsu. Then, she lay on the rock and looked forward, as if she was secretly peeping at something. Atsu was a little hesitant. It instinctively wanted to step back, but after a moment, White Lotus waved at it again. Atsu slowly walked to her side. White Lotus pointed behind the rock and whispered to Atsu, "Look." Atsu also became a little nervous. It secretly poked its head out, and saw that in the open space in the forest about 6 feet behind the rock, there was a guinea pheasant standing on the ground, looking for food in the fallen leaves with its head down. It was also at this moment that Atsu suddenly heard a soft and somewhat bewitching voice, like the whisper of the devil floating beside it. The pheasant's meat must be delicious. Atsu's body suddenly tensed up. Chapter 188. In the quiet forest, White Lotus and Atsu were like thieves, sneakily hiding behind a big rock, peeping at the pheasant that was foraging for food in the forest in front of them. The pheasant looked very beautiful, with beautiful pearl-like spots dotted on its bright feathers. Its long tail feathers kept moving up and down, sweeping across the forest in a stunning arc. Atsu watched for a while, then retracted its head and turned around to leave. However, a small white hand stopped it. White Lotus looked at it with a faint smile on her face, then gently hugged Atsu's neck. For some reason, Atsu was wary of almost everyone except Luchen and Exian, but only in front of this White Lotus. Although it was not very close to this little girl, it did not react too strongly to White Lotus's various actions. Right now, Atsu was somewhat obediently pulled back by White Lotus. It's only I was looking at White Lotus's overly beautiful face, and its eyes flashed with a little uneasiness. White Lotus pressed it down and sat behind the rock, ignoring the dirt on the ground. She just smiled, then moved closer to Atsu's ear and whispered, "I think you are a different dog. There are some strange things about you that I have never been able to figure out." Atsu tilted its head and seemed to want to leave again, but it was pulled back by White Lotus. The little girl stared into Atsu's eyes. Although this black dog was ugly and fierce, she did not have the slightest disgust or contempt. In fact, there was a rare trace of gentleness in her eyes. She just smiled and whispered, "You should be more than this, Atsu. I don't know why you don't eat blood and living things." She gently raised her body and glanced at the gap in the rock. After confirming that the pheasant was still behind, she turned around and said to Atsu, "You are the first demonic beast I have seen that survived after suffering from the blood-eating secret method. Do you know what this result means?" She clenched her fist and waved it in front of Atsu, saying, "In those dirty barbarian tribes, demonic beasts like you have another name." "Holy beast," White Lotus said with a smile, then gently touched Atsu's head. Kunwa City, Black Hill Pavilion. Luchin stood up and said to Old Ma, "It's getting late. You keep an eye on these things first. Later we will." Before he finished speaking, Old Ma stretched out his hand and stopped him, saying, "Don't go yet. I still have something to tell you." Luchin said, "What is it?" Old Ma said, "I found He Gang." Luchin raised his eyebrows. He glanced at Old Ma, then sat down again and said, "Where?" Old Ma said, "In this Kunwa city." Luchin smiled and said, "Good. Fatty, your methods are more powerful than I thought." Old Ma said modestly, "You flatter me. This is my job. It's my duty. There's no need to make a fuss about it." Luchin snorted and said, "Hypocrite. There really aren't any good fatties these days." "Hey." Old Ma couldn't take it anymore and said, "How can you be like this? You always become hostile and scold people. Although some people have wronged you, not all fatties are like this. Let me tell you, fatties also have dignity." Old Ma said righteously. "Oh, I'm sorry," Luchin said. Old Ma was stunned for a moment. He didn't expect Luchin to admit his mistake so straightforwardly. For a moment he felt a bit embarrassed and said with a hollow laugh, It's actually nothing." "It's nothing." Luchin smiled faintly and looked at Old Ma without saying anything. Old Ma suddenly felt a bit scared when he was looked at like this. He subconsciously took a step back and said, What are you thinking? I'm telling you, don't mess around. Fatties aren't easy to deal with. I'm telling you." Luchin walked forward and patted his shoulder. He suddenly sighed and said softly, "Old Ma, it's my luck to have you accompany me for more than 10 years. He paused for a moment and then said word by word, "Thank you." Old Ma was stunned for a moment, and then slightly lowered his head. After a moment, he suddenly laughed, but his laughter was a bit hoarse. He scolded with a smile. "Thank you, my ass. Do you think I really wanted to accompany you? Wasn't it because I had no other choice? I'm telling you, you owe me a lot of favors for more than 10 years. "Oh, did I?" Luchin asked. "Nonsense, of course I did. How many times have I helped you? How many times have I saved you? If I exchanged all of that for spirit stones, it would be enough for us to buy a street in Kunwa City. Is it actually so valuable? But why do I feel that even if the two of us added up, we wouldn't be able to exchange for a single shop in Kunwa City, not to mention an entire street?" "Oh, this isn't important." Old Ma rubbed his head and very calmly threw this awkward question to the back of his mind. Then, it could be seen that his mood suddenly became very good. He had a very happy smile on his face. He laughed and reached out to pat Luchin's shoulder, but he quickly withdrew his hand. He probably felt that doing so was too unmanly. He took 2 steps to the side and took a deep breath. He seemed to have regained his composure. He then turned around and said with a smile, "Less nonsense. Tell me, what should we do with that He Gang?" Luchin pondered for a moment and said, "Keep an eye on him for the time being. Don't touch him?" Old Ma grunted and said, "But he has always been investigating that matter. What should we do?" Luchin said, Let him investigate. Maybe he can alert some people hiding in the dark. Fine. Then you be careful. Lucien thought for a moment and said, but it's not good to completely ignore it. You find someone to keep an eye on that guy. Otherwise, when we're about to make a move, we can't suddenly find him. Old Ma nodded and said, of course that's not a problem. But what do you plan to do about making a move? Lucien smiled and said, this depends on he. If the time is right, we can use his most valued younger brother to force him. Presumably he will also do something unexpected. Old Ma glanced at him and nodded in agreement. Lucien was silent for a moment. Then he suddenly smiled bitterly and said, what I said. Am I born to be an evil person? Old Ma comforted him. How can there be so much right and wrong? Our hands have been stained with a lot of blood, but I always feel that what we've done all these years is always right. Lucien stared into Old Ma's eyes and said, is that what you think? Old Ma nodded and said frankly, yes, that's what I think. I feel that the two of us, as well as the Supreme, have never done anything wrong. Lucien took a deep breath and nodded. You're right. Then I'm leaving. Take care. Be careful. I'll find a chance to go down the mountain in a couple of days. Lucien said. Old Ma sent him to the door of the Black Hill Pavilion and said, that's fine. It's all up to you. In short, it's all about your own safety. Don't force yourself. Lucien smiled and turned to leave. But Old Ma suddenly seemed to remember something and asked him, right. You told me about the three-eyed strange insect earlier. What? Did you think of something? Lucien turned to look at him. Old Ma shook his head and said, that's not it. I'm just a little curious. If that strange insect was as fierce and gluttonous as you said, there would have been a fierce battle when it met you that night? He looked at Lucien and asked, what was the result of the battle? Lucien closed his eyes for a moment, and then he shrugged and said, that strange insect really was ferocious and very troublesome. I was thrown into confusion when it suddenly charged out, and I was almost injured by it. But then I used a dagger to defend myself. After a few rounds, the strange insect couldn't do anything to me and ran away. As he said this, one of his hands hung at his side. In the sleeve of his robe, there was a hard and coarse charred black stone gently rolling in his palm. There were some fierce marks on it. Old Ma let out an, ah, and looked a little disappointed. I see. Didn't the strange insect leave anything behind? Any bones, limbs, or pieces of flesh would do. Perhaps it would be easier to find it this way. He paused for a moment and smiled. Looks like you've recovered well recently. Although your cultivation has been crippled, your combat power is not low. Lucien was silent for a moment. He looked at Old Ma. His lips moved slightly, but he still pursed them. He curled his fingers and clenched the remains of the strange insect in his hand. Then he smiled and said, yes, I didn't leave anything behind. You slowly go over and bite its neck. Bai Lian's voice reverberated through the quiet forest, reverberating in Atu's ears. It was as if the first time they had met, the scene of blood-stained red once again appeared before his eyes. Atsu's breathing began to quicken. White Lotus looked at Atsu. There was a hint of excitement in her eyes. It was the kind of joy a girl would have when she saw her favorite toy. There was also a hint of strange cruelty in her eyes. Go-Go, you are different from the other demonic beasts. They should be ants crawling under your feet. You're the holy beast that's rarely seen in 100 years. Go bite it and drink its blood. Atsu slowly turned its head. It's only I reflected the figure of the pheasant. There was a touch of blood, but it seemed to be struggling. After killing and drinking blood, you'll be completely different, Atsu. White Lotus gently squatted beside the black dog and stroked its head. Her face was like a fairy, but her voice was like a demon from hell. It was light and full of bewitchment. Go. After you start killing, the power of the blood-feeding secret method will grow in your body. You'll become a more powerful existence than any other monster. Atsu suddenly raised its head and looked in front. At that moment, no one knew whether the crippled black dog understood the meaning of those words. However, its eyes had already turned completely red. Blood red. Chapter 189. The days passed quietly, and a lot of things happened naturally. Su Qingjun went back to the Su family. Under the comfort and persuasion of her father, Su Tianhe, she finally reconciled with her family. Originally, they had been a family of blood relatives for decades. How could they really cut off this familial love? Moreover, Su Tianhe gave his genius daughter enough face and punished the 3 brothers of the Su family. Even Su Qingjuan's mother, Madame Bai, had tears in her eyes. She hugged Su Qingjun and cried. As a result, after the storm, the Su family became harmonious again. However, after this time, the entire Su family clearly saw that Su Qingjuan's status in the family was like a crane in a flock of chickens, and no one could compare to her. After returning to the mountain, Su Qingjun saw Lu Chun. She was a little embarrassed, but she still told him about it. Lu Chun just smiled and congratulated her. He didn't say much, nor did he complain about the pain and suffering he had suffered in vain. Su Qingjun wanted to make it up to him, but she didn't know what to do at the moment. She thought that there was still a long way to go, so she wasn't in a hurry. In any case, now that Lu Chun had the status of a nominal disciple, she had a reason to take care of him. In the future, she would find a chance to accept him as a direct disciple. She would provide him with all kinds of resources and elixirs. At the end of the day, he would be able to reach the foundation establishment realm. That way, his life of cultivation wouldn't be in vain. There were still 18 days until the next full moon. When the moon rose, it seemed to be thinner than yesterday. The moonlight was still very bright. It shone on the windowsill of the wooden house on the Flying Goose Terrace like frost and snow. Lu Chun lay on the bed and quietly looked at the night outside the window. After a while, there was a slight movement in the darkness. Atsu walked over and leaned against him. He lifted his front feet and placed them on the windowsill. He also looked at the moon outside. The moonlight shone on the man and the dog, and it was as soft as water ripples. Lu Chun reached out to touch Atsu's body, and found that the black dog was staring at the moon in the sky in a daze. Its only eye was shining with an inexplicable brilliance, like a black, transparent gem. There was a hint of loneliness in his gaze. He looked forward to it. Lu Chun looked at Atsu quietly and did not disturb it. After a while, Atsu turned around and looked at Lu Chun again. Under the moonlight, Atsu's single eye flickered and gradually became gentle. Then it obediently lay down beside Lu Chun, snuggled up to him, closed its eyes, and fell into a deep sleep. Lu Chun closed the window and darkness descended upon the room. For a moment, he suddenly wished he had a mirror so that he could look at his own face and eyes. Because just now, he suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity from Atsu's gaze. It was just like him 10 years ago. These few days when it was late at night, Lu Chun would secretly go out and walk through the mountain paths of the Kunlun Mountains in the dark, carefully testing the boundless darkness. However, the strange strange insect never appeared again. That soul-stirring and dangerous encounter that night seemed to be an accident, or perhaps it was just an inexplicable coincidence. If it were not for the fact that Lu Chun was still holding a hard, charred stone in his hand, the scene that night might really be like a dream and not real. However, the rough feeling of the black stone in his hand kept reminding Lu Chun of the evil behind the stone. When it was late at night, when even Atsu was immersed in dreamland, Lu Chun quietly left Flying Goose Terrace and walked into the deep night. He did not tell Old Ma the whole truth about the strange three-eyed insect, especially when he had already killed such a monster. Because once he told him, it would inevitably involve the biggest secret in his body at the moment, the unprecedented black divine disc, and the horrible nature of robbing vitality to grow. He did not want others to know. Perhaps he had been a shadow for too long, and was no longer used to trusting others. Even when it was Old Ma who he could entrust his life to, he instinctively wanted to keep the last bit of the secret, as if he was hiding his last trump card. If the strange three-eyed insect did not appear, the matter would have ended without a hitch. Perhaps it was really just a strange monster that came out of nowhere. However, could there really be such a coincidence in this world? In the vast Kunlun Mountains, the strange three-eyed insect did not look for anyone else. And it just happened to meet him? Lu Chun had been a shadow for many years, and he no longer believed in coincidences, including this time. Therefore, he had been thinking hard about this matter, thinking over and over again, trying to find out what was different about him or what was so eye-catching about him. But after thinking about it, he found that he seemed to have only one secret, which might be different enough to attract such a monster. It was still the mysterious black divine disk in his ocean of energy. That night, he pondered for a long time on the dark mountain path, then closed his eyes slightly to the night. The darkness surged around him like a tide, like the rising waves of the sea. When he opened his eyes again, the dark flames were already burning in his pupils. The silent black flame slowly burned on his body. At this moment, there was no longer the pain and despair of the past. The black flame seemed to have become a part of Lu Chen's body, swaying on his flesh. The night was as dark as ink, and the darkness rolled like a tide. This man stood in this dark night, as if he was roaring angrily at the boundless darkness in front of him, a call. Then the night was cold, and the darkness was like an abyss. There was no response. Everything seemed dim and dull. Only the feeling of loneliness still lingered around him. Lu Chen was a little disappointed, and he quietly let the black flames shrink back into his body and extinguish. But at this moment, his heart suddenly moved, and he looked towards the depths of the Kunlun mountain range. That was a distance that could not be seen. That was the most mysterious forbidden area of the Kunlun mountain range. There was a thick fog that did not dissipate all year round, and there were 4 strange mountain peaks floating in the sky. Passing through the darkness, passing through the mountains, an inexplicable throbbing suddenly surged from the void, as if someone was looking in this direction from afar, but it also seemed like nothing had actually happened. Lu Chen sensed that something was off, but that feeling disappeared in a flash, and did not even give him extra time to carefully savor it. It disappeared in an instant just like that. However, Lu Chen could already feel that something was different in this short period of time. Something was really over there, in that forbidden area, and it was resonating with the dark aura in his body. What kind of secret was hidden in this quiet and incomparably huge Kunlun mountain range? And this secret, could it be related to the spy of the devil cult? During the day, someone came to the Flying Goose platform, and despite Lu Chen's dissuasion, insisted on calling Su Qingjun out of the cave. Su Qingjun was a little unhappy. Of course, this was easy to understand. But very soon, the news brought by this person made Lu Chen and Su Qingjun a little startled. The case of He Changxing's murder, which had caused a sensation for a while but soon died down, suddenly stirred up waves after dragging on for such a long time. He, who was entrusted by the sect masters to investigate this matter, was under great pressure, but still insisted on investigating to the end. Finally, he found something and began to take action. However, the first person he attacked still surprised most of the people, because he brought people to detain the 3 brothers of the Su family, Sumo, Su Qian and Su Wen. Detaining them under the pretext of investigating the assassination of the devil cult was tantamount to suspecting that the 3 brothers of the Su family were not only related to He Changxing's death, but also possibly colluding with the devil cult. This accusation, or rather, this crime was too big and too heavy. So heavy that even the Su family could not bear it. So the Su family quickly began to take action. They mobilized their informants in the Kunlun party, as well as some cultivators they were on good terms with to inquire about the news. At the same time, they also tried their best to help the 3 brothers of the Su family. Among them, the most important was of course Su Qingjun, so the message brought today was to implore Su Qingjun to help as soon as possible. After listening to the news, Su Qingjun looked grim. She did not discuss it with Lu Chen, closed the stone door of the cave, and directly went down the mountain with the messenger. After watching Su Qingjun go far away, Lu Chen also looked down the mountain with a complicated expression. Unlike Su Qingjun, who knew almost nothing about this matter, Lu Chen knew almost everything about He Changxing's murder case. In this world, who knew the most about a murder case? It must be the murderer. Lu Chen waited on the Fian platform for a while, then also got up and went down the mountain. When the Fian platform quieted down, and there was only one dog left, Atsu looked a little anxious and irritated. It looked at the forest in the back of the mountain again and again. After a while, it slowly got up and walked in. There was a faint light in the forest, and Atsu could see its surroundings very clearly. As it walked, It heard the familiar chirping of birds. However, that day, Atsu did not meet White Lotus again. In fact, after meeting White Lotus that day, Atsu did not see her again. The little girl, who was only a little over 10 years old, seemed to be busier than most adults. Not seeing White Lotus, Atsu did not seem surprised, and even looked a little more relaxed. But soon, its body tensed up again, because it saw a little bird suddenly fly to the ground in front of the forest, using its beak to search for food in the thick layer of leaves. Almost without any hesitation, Atsu slowly approached it. Its figure and movements were almost silent, as if it was born to do so. Like a genius hunter, it slowly approached the bird. Suddenly, the black dog pounced on the bird, and before it could startle it, it bit its wing. Chapter 190. He-Yi's sudden action seemed tough and abrupt, and his target was the Su family, a well-known aristocratic family in Kunwa City. Therefore, it was hard for people not to think of what happened to his younger brother, He-Gang, some time ago. Revenge in public? Or was he deliberately framing others? All kinds of guesses and rumors quickly spread, but after Su Qingjun went down the mountain and met her father, she learned about it through her trusted subordinates in the sect, so she had a general idea of what was going on. First of all, he did take people to detain Sumo and the other two brothers of the Su family, but he only detained them temporarily. He didn't convict them, nor did he interrogate them by torture. In the words of the other side, he just asked them some questions. There was, of course, a world of difference between questioning and convicting them. Although the Su family was still indignant, they calmed down a little. As for why he didn't find anyone else but the Su family, the other side also gave a very powerful reason that made the Su family speechless. Before He Chongqing's accident, the three brothers of the Su family had ganged up on and humiliated He Chongqing in the fragrance garden. To put it bluntly, they beat him up and threatened him. Then a few days later, He Chongqing died. If this was not a big suspicion, then no one was more suspicious. When Su Tianhe and the others learned about this, they were also speechless for a long time. But after all, he was a blood relative of the Su family, so they couldn't really give up. Therefore, the Su family still tried their best to mobilize all kinds of connections in the Kunlun party to plead for him. But this method, which had always been successful in the past, ran into a snag this time. The reason was that he didn't fall for it, and the other virtuous elders in the sect declined one after another, unwilling to get involved in this trouble. For this reason, Su Qingjun even went to find her master, Masato Kahara, and the answer she got was, first, make it clear that if there was nothing wrong, nothing would happen, and they would let him go. Second, this matter was very troublesome. It was said that even immortals paid attention to it. Ordinary people, including immortal Yuanying, didn't want to get into trouble. In a somewhat anxious and angry mood, the Su family secretly made up their mind to find trouble with He-Yi. But soon, their anger turned into surprise. The three brothers of the Su family had been questioned separately. Most of the time, the three of them could answer most of the questions. However, when He-Yi asked the crucial question, which was the night He Chongqing died, where the three of them had gone, Su Qian and Su Wen both gave their own testimonies. However, after Su Mo answered, it was unexpectedly proven that he was lying. Sumo said that he slept alone in his residence that night, but very soon, someone proved that he went out, and then several people saw him. As for asking where he went after that, Sumo was dumbfounded and couldn't answer for a long time. Of course, there was something wrong with this situation. Needless to say, Su Qian and Su Wen were released, but only Sumo was detained. But this time it wasn't so polite. She was directly detained in a secluded quiet room, which was equivalent to being locked up. After that, there wasn't much news, but as it spread, it gradually became dark. Because it was said that He-Yi was eager to make a contribution, and planned to, or had already started to try to use torture on Sumo. Retribution in the present. Retribution in the present. Lu Chen arrived at the Black Hill Pavilion opened by Old Ma in Kunwa City. Listening to Old Ma's gloating tone, Lu Chen couldn't help but shake his head and say, "Don't be too happy. We still don't know whether this news is reliable or not. It's all spread by others. Who cares?" Old Ma laughed and said, In any case, I've long disliked that guy Sumo. It's best if he suffers a bit more. Unfortunately, my identity is limited, otherwise I really want to go and see with my own eyes. Luchin waved his hand. He was too lazy to argue with old Ma about these things. He sat there and pondered for a moment before saying. This time, he acted without any warning. Almost no one knew about it beforehand. It feels a bit strange. It seems like he suddenly got hold of some information, so he began to vigorously investigate. Old Ma frowned and the smile on his face faded a bit. He looked at Luchin with a hint of worry and asked in a low voice, "What's wrong? Is there any danger?" Luchin shook his head and said, "Not yet. Let's wait and see first." After a pause, his eyes suddenly flashed and he said, "Could it be that he got the information from the martyr's grave?" Old Ma walked to the side and returned after a moment. He handed him a letter and said, "Take a look yourself." Luchin glanced at the envelope and saw that there was no signature, no specific name, and no word on the envelope. He took out 2 pieces of paper. After reading it, he suddenly nodded and then sighed softly. The damn Baldy said that he will rush back 3 to 5 days before the next full moon night. Old Ma smiled and said, "You see, I told you long ago that the old man still likes you the most. Even if you are a little uncertain, he is still willing to believe you." Luchin didn't comment, but he was still silent for a while. Then he stood up and walked 2 steps in the room. He said to Old Ma, "You pay attention to He Gang these days. It's better to send more people to keep an eye on him. Don't let him suddenly run away." Old Ma narrowed his eyes slightly and said, "What do you want to do?" Luchin said indifferently, "I haven't thought about it yet, but I've thought about one thing before. Maybe it's a plan to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. If he pursues this matter strictly and refuses to let Sumo off, and at the same time his only blood brother suddenly meets with an accident in Kunwa City, what will the result be?" Old Ma pondered in silence. After a while, he suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air and looked at Luchin. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. Luchin calmly said, "Killing 2 birds with 1 stone. The general idea is that he will definitely suspect that the aristocratic families of Kunwa City, specifically the Su family, did it. In order to vent his anger, he killed his brother, so the hatred between him and the Su family will be deep. Secondly, when the Su family hears this news, they will definitely think that he will be furious. Then, who will he vent his anger on?" Old Ma nodded and said, "Good plan. Not bad, not bad." Luchin looked at Old Ma and said, "Although Sumo is stupid and annoying, his identity is different from others. He is the legitimate son of clan head Su Tianhe and Su Qingjuan's blood brother. The Su family will absolutely not tolerate anything happening to Sumo." But Old Ma seemed to want to say something, but he was stopped by Luchin. Luchin didn't have any intention of speaking loudly. He just said to him very calmly, "In the next few days, arrange for someone to go there and do it cleanly." Old Ma was silent for a moment before he nodded and said, "Okay. Right, there's one more thing. When you came last time, you told me about the strange 3-eyed insect." Old Ma suddenly changed the topic and began to talk about other things. "Oh," Luchin said and said, "How is it? Did you find any clues?" Old Ma's expression was a little solemn. He looked at Luchin with a strange look in his eyes and said, "I've looked into this thing, but the result seems to be that this thing has been extinct for thousands of years. It has long disappeared from this world." Luchin was stunned and said in surprise, "What did you say? What is this thing?" Old Ma said, "According to the appearance and talent you mentioned, I couldn't find any clues at first. But after looking through some ancient scrolls with a long history, I finally found a monster similar to it in the oldest one. Blood-devouring insect. That's the name," Old Ma said. "Blood-devouring insect?" Luchin frowned and thought for a moment. He said, "I don't think I have heard of it." "It's normal that you haven't heard of it. Even for me, this is the first time I have heard of such a monster. When I went to the Library of Ancient Scrolls and saw the blood-devouring insect, I was really worried about you." Luchin said, "Why do you say so?" Old Ma didn't answer and asked, "Do you still remember the legend of the 2 founders of the Kunlun party occupying the spirited mountain of Kunlun and establishing the sect?" "I remember." The senior brothers and sisters in the Kunlun party had told this story countless times, but there were always people who forgot it. Old Ma nodded and said, "It is related to that." Legend had it that when the two ancestors, Kuan Yuanzi and Tai Luo, established their sects, they used their great magic power to drive all the animals down the mountain. As a result, all kinds of demon beasts ran amok and created a foul atmosphere. But it doesn't matter. It is said that there was a sign in the sky that the divine dragon came to the world and passed down the orthodoxy for thousands of years. But at the same time, evil spirits appeared in the mountain and countless monsters attacked the living creatures. There is a monster called blood-devouring insect. Lu Chen frowned and asked, "Since this thing is so terrible, why didn't the Kunlun party know about it?" "That's because this thing was completely wiped out 3,000 or 4,000 years ago." Old Ma smiled bitterly and then said in a low voice, "That's why I said that you really seem to have met a ghost this time. Something that hasn't been seen for thousands of years came to trouble you as soon as it came out." Lu Chen shook his head and said, "According to what you said, these blood-devouring insects should have been extinct for thousands of years." "Yes. Back then, it appeared with the evil spirits that were born in the Kunlun Mountains and harmed the world. At least that's what the book said." Old Ma shrugged and said, "I don't know what happened thousands of years ago." Lu Chen slowly stood up and whispered, "It seems that there are a lot of strange things in that forbidden area." "What did you say?" Old Ma asked him. Lu Chen shook his head and then said to him, "Now there are more things on the Kunlun mountain. I may not be able to come down at any time these days. Gang, you can keep an eye on him. If you see any great opportunity, you can send him off yourself. I'd like to see if Yi's affection for his brother will be so desperate that he will completely fight with the Su family. At that time, if he recklessly acts recklessly and things become more and more chaotic, maybe the traitor will also reveal a little." He stood up and smiled at Old Ma. Then he put his hand in his sleeve and touched the scorched stone, a blood-devouring insect that had been completely burned to ashes. Chapter 191. There were still 16 days until the next full moon night. The Su family worked hard in the sect, hoping to rescue Sumo. Because no matter what, they didn't believe that Sumo, who had been pampered and spoiled since she was a child, would have any relations with the cruel and vicious evildoers of the devil cult. In fact, it wasn't just the Su family who thought so. Most of the people from influential clans in Kungwa City also had similar views. Therefore, the rumor that He suddenly found trouble with the Su family was to vent his anger for the matter with He gang a while ago naturally spread. This kind of rumor was very damaging and often made people unable to advance or retreat, making them very depressed. But this time He seemed to be determined to go through with it to the end. From beginning to end, he remained indifferent to the pressure from the outside world. Despite the pressure from the Su family, he still hadn't released Sumo. The activities of the Su family in the sect also encountered unexpected resistance. Almost all the Taoist masters in the Yuanying realm and above refused or declined the request to intercede on their behalf, including Su Qingjuan's Shifu, Masato Kohara. This deadlock lasted for a day or two, and the atmosphere in the Kunlun party suddenly changed. Many of the originally indignant and seemingly very angry clans suddenly became silent. They were all old foxes who had mingled in the mountains of Kunlun for several hundred years, who didn't know how to listen to the wind, and who didn't know how to steer according to the wind. Although Su Qingjun quarreled with Sumo and the others a while ago and even taught them a lesson, causing her and her family to be in a cold war for a while, no matter what was said, Sumo was still her blood-related younger brother. But no matter what, Suemo was still her blood-related younger brother, and her parents were worried sick. She couldn't stay out of it, so she went to plead with her master, Master Muyuan. The whole Kunlun party knew Masato Kihara's love for Su Qingjun, but on that day, he still shook his head and refused Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun was puzzled. Masato Kihara sighed. Seeing that there was no one around, she said to her softly, "Now is not like before. This matter already has the intention of Senior Immortal. They will definitely investigate it thoroughly, and no one can stop them. You should also behave for the time being. Don't stand out at will." Su Qingjun was shocked. Her face turned pale, and even her voice trembled as she whispered, "Shifu, Could it be that Hakushin Jinkuen actually did something to our Su family? Shut up. Masato Kihara's expression suddenly changed. She immediately opened her mouth to stop Su Qingjun, and then observed the surroundings. Although the two of them were in Masato Kihara's own cave, and it was almost impossible for ordinary people to eavesdrop on their conversation, but Masato Kihara's expression was as careful as a thief. After observing the surroundings for a while, Masato Kihara let out a sigh of relief. Then she pulled Su Qingjun to another secluded place and said, "Listen carefully. First, this matter is not targeted at your Su family. It's just that your younger brothers were unlucky and happened to encounter this matter. They also happen to give the truth to others, so naturally, we have to investigate. But if there is a justifiable reason, then he will not make things too difficult for you. Didn't you see that Su Qian and Su Wen have both gone back?" Su Qingjun responded. Her complexion looked a little better, as if she had breathed a sigh of relief. However, she was still a little worried and asked in a low voice, "What about Su Mo?" Masato Kihara did not answer her question. She just snorted and said, "The second thing you don't know is that the one who pays attention to this matter is not Hakushin Jinkuen, but perfected Lord Tianlan." Ah! Su Qingjun was shocked and said, "Grandmaster Tianlan? How could he?" Masato Kihara said with a sullen face, "Although martial uncle Tianlan is not often in Kunlun Mountain, he is after all one of the two supreme perfected gods of Huashan realm in our sect. I heard that a few days ago, the senior suddenly wrote a letter in his own hand, sternly reprimanding sect leader Xianhua Shixiang, saying that in the Kunlun Mountains, a devil cult evildoer unexpectedly killed people, which is really a shocking matter. Moreover, after many days of investigation, there is still no progress, which is even more incompetent." Su Qingjuan's beautiful face turned pale when she heard this. Although she had not yet reached the highest level in the cultivation world like Jinren Yuanying, she had been influenced by aristocratic families since she was a child, and because of her outstanding talent, she had followed Masato Kihara for a long time, so she still knew some of the changes in the sect. At this moment, she subconsciously covered her mouth with her hand and said in surprise, "Grandmaster Tianlan, how could he speak to a mortal sect leader like this?" Masato Kihara smiled and said, "He is a perfected god of Huashan realm, and also the martial uncle of Idle Month. Of course he is qualified. Didn't you see that although Idle Month was unhappy at that time, he still gritted his teeth and endured it?" Su Qingjun was a smart person, and she quickly thought of another matter. She whispered, "Then Grandmaster Bai Chun," Masato Kihara said lightly, "in this kind of matter, it is impossible for martial uncle Bai Chun to come forward and say anything." Su Qingjun nodded, but there was still a worried look on her face. Masato Kihara glanced at her, sighed and said, "Qingjun, you know that our Tieji is weak. Now there are undercurrents in the sect, and the open and secret struggles are all on the Kuanji side. Not to mention other things, just the two perfected gods, who are in the open and in the dark, are not people we dare to get involved in at all. Otherwise, if those two get angry, the consequences will be unimaginable." Su Qingjun nodded silently and didn't say anything else. Masato Kihara thought for a moment and comforted her. "But in my opinion, if your brother really didn't do anything, he will suffer a little at most. It shouldn't be a big deal." Su Qingjun suddenly raised her head and said, "Master, is that true?" Masato Kihara smiled and said, "Now that perfected god Tianlan has suddenly come forward to put pressure, even sect master Idle Month martial uncle can't take it, let alone he, a little disciple. Therefore they must give an explanation. Under such circumstances, they won't easily let off anyone who is even slightly suspicious, but they probably won't deliberately make a confession through torture. How can they fake it in front of a perfected god? So," he patted Su Qingjuan's shoulder and said gently, "Go back and tell the head of the Su family and the other family members that they have to temporarily endure it. It will be better after this period of time. Our Kunlun party is a famous sect with 5,000 years of history. The sect rules are strict, and we definitely won't wrongly accuse an innocent person." "All right," Su Qingjun said softly. These words were told by Masato Kihara to Su Qingjun in private. Many people who hadn't reached the level of perfected yuanying couldn't see it so clearly. This was the case for the Su family. However, after Su Qingjun brought back this news, the head of the Su family, Su Tianhe, made a prompt decision to immediately cease all activities and prepare to listen to Masato Kahara's advice. There were some twists and turns in the process. Madame Bai, who was anxious for her son, was heartbroken and wanted to save him as soon as possible. She made a small fuss, but it was quickly suppressed by Su Tianhe. After sending off her family, Su Qingjun returned to the Flying Goose Terrace with worry for Sumo. She looked at the sky and saw that it was almost dark. She stood by the roadside for a while, and saw that the door of the wooden house was closed. She could vaguely see a figure inside. She seemed to want to go over and say a few words, probably to chat with Lu Chen. However, in the end, she walked back to the cave in the mountain wall without saying a word and didn't come out again for the whole day. Lu Chen lay in the wooden house and saw the appearance of Su Qingjun when she came back. However, he didn't have the intention to greet her. Instead, he stayed on the bed with Atsu in his arms and watched the sky turn dark and the moon rise. That night, the moon was already as thin as a hook, hanging alone in the sky. Atsu squatted on the bed beside him and looked up at the moon through the window, lost in thought. Lu Chen gently stroked Atsu's head. He didn't know when, but Atsu had fallen in love with the moon. It often stared at the bright moon for a long time, but it didn't howl at the moon like many wolves and dogs. It just silently looked at the moon, unusually quiet, but there was a strange aura emanating from its body, making people feel that it was different from the black dog in the past. The next day, the seemingly calm Kunlun mountain suddenly stirred up waves. Before noon, Sumo, who the Su family was worried about, had not been released, but he sent someone to ask a few people to his place. These people, including Lin Kuangyi and Zhang Ji, were all at the scene of the dispute in the Liuxiang garden that day. After hearing this news, Lu Chen had a bad feeling. Sure enough, someone came to Fian platform in the afternoon. That person was a Kunlun disciple from the Heavenly Soldier Hall. In terms of seniority, he was He Yi's junior. When he came here, his words were polite, but his attitude was very firm. He invited Su Qingjun and Lu Chen to go with him to meet He Yi. Everyone chatted. At this time, of course, no one was willing to chat with He Yi. He said he was chatting, but everyone knew that he had a bad idea. If they were not careful, they might be detained, and the detained people would not dare to resist. First, there was the strict rules of the Kunlun party, and this matter was personally ordered by the sect leader to track down the evildoer of the devil cult. Behind this, there was also the figure of the high and mighty perfected deity of Huashan. Who dared to offend such a person? Lu Chen and Su Qingjun did not intend to resist. They happily agreed, and then followed the person to meet He Yi. But in his heart, Lu Chen greeted the damn baldy many times in a friendly manner. Previously, it was only said that He Yi detained people, but when they were really brought to the location, Lu Chen was stunned to discover that He Yi had actually placed the place where the suspect was detained and interrogated directly in the martyr's grave at the back of the nameless mountain peak. When he saw that black courtyard and confirmed that it was the location, Lu Chen suddenly had a kind of secret delight in his heart. Staying in this kind of place and not letting go. That person called Sumo would most likely suffer a lot these days. Different from Lu Chen, Su Qingjun had never been here before. Looking at this gloomy place, Su Qingjun, like almost everyone else, revealed a disgusted and surprised expression. It seemed that she had never thought that on the Kunlun mountain, there would actually be such a place. Although it was not fast, they still had to go. But when they were about to knock on the door, suddenly the black door outside the martyr's grave was suddenly opened. Then a person staggered out. His steps were somewhat unsteady. Looking closely, it was He Yi. Chapter 192. Lu Chen and Su Qingjun were both taken aback. After looking at each other, they both stopped in their tracks. The Kunlun disciple who led the way was also taken aback. He hurriedly rushed over and supported He Yi. He anxiously said, Xixiang, what happened to you? He Yi waved his hand to indicate that he was fine. He then saw Su Qingjun and Lu Chen behind him and nodded to them. Seeing that his expression was generally normal, It didn't seem like something serious had happened. Su Qingjun and Lu Chun then walked over. Su Qingjun looked at He and frowned. Xixiang, what happened to you? Why do you look so pale? He smiled bitterly. He was about to say something when suddenly the others seemed to have sensed something. They all turned their heads to look in the direction of the black courtyard of the martyr's grave. They saw a gust of wind carrying bursts of smoke and dust suddenly soar into the air like an earth dragon, twisting in the courtyard. The sound of the wind was mournful. One could even faintly hear the sharp whistling sound of the air breaking. Even from far away, one could feel the strong spiritual power rolling near the wind vent. Lu Chen's expression changed slightly. Su Qingjun, who was next to him, also looked quite surprised. She said, "Someone is fighting inside?" Before her voice died away, the sound of the wind suddenly became 10 times stronger. It actually rushed directly towards the door. In an instant, sand and stones flew away. Su Qingjuan's expression changed slightly in the wind. She suddenly reached out to grab Lu Chen's arm, intending to pull him back. Who knew that her grab would actually grab empty air? She looked back in surprise and found that Lu Chen was running much faster than her. In just a short while, he had actually fled several feet away. It was no wonder that she couldn't catch Lu Chen. Su Qingjun snorted. She glared at Lu Chen in annoyance and awkwardness. She followed him and mumbled, "His cultivation is not high, but he runs fast." Lu Chen's ears were sharp, and he actually heard these words. He smiled at Su Qingjun, who was walking over, and said, "I can't help it. It's not easy to get by in this world, and I don't have the invincible talent like you geniuses. Any one of you is enough to annoy us, the janitor disciples. So you can do anything in cultivation, but you can't slack off in escaping. You talk too much." Su Qingjun first smiled, then scolded him. On the other side, he took in the two's conversation and expressions. He seemed to be deep in thought, but his expression didn't change much. After a while, the wind gradually weakened, and the earth dragon in the air seemed to be affected by some powerful force. It twisted more and more, and then suddenly broke in the middle and fell to the ground. Then the wind stopped. A person walked out from the black courtyard, and it was Dongfang Tao. The darkness rolled and rolled behind him, and one could vaguely see another withered and skinny figure. It was the corpse watcher, but he clearly didn't have much interest in the people outside the cemetery. Since this figure had appeared, the people who seemed to have been in a fierce battle just now were naturally Dongfang Tao and the corpse watcher. This discovery shocked Lu Chen and Su Qingjun. It should be known that Dongfang Tao had broken through to the Yuanying realm, and could be considered as another powerful figure in the Kunlun party. But the most surprising thing was the corpse watcher. Although he looked ugly and skinny, like a lonely old man, or like an old man who had been decaying for many years, from the situation just now, this corpse watcher must have used all kinds of strange secret techniques. Compared to a true Yuanying realm master, he did not seem to be at a disadvantage. Of course, why these two people fought, and why they suddenly stopped, was not something Lu Chen and Su Qingjun could guess. Dongfang Tao said something to the corpse watcher, and it seemed that he was a little angry. The corpse watcher also responded with a few words, and it gave off a somewhat strange feeling, which immediately made Dongfang Tao angry again. But even so, in the end, Dongfang Tao actually suppressed his anger and left the back of the dark mountain peak. On Dongfang Tao's way out, he, Su Qingjun, and Lu Chen all lowered their heads and bowed to him. Dongfang Tao did not pay much attention to these young people, and at most nodded at He as a sign of respect. Watching Dongfang Tao swagger off, Lu Chen and Su Qingjun finally reached the edge of the doorway. He was one step ahead of them, and rushed into the courtyard first. He looked at the corpse watcher and said, "Senior, look. You guys do what you need to do, don't mind me." The corpse watcher said coldly, then turned around and walked into the darkness, looking completely different from usual. He let out a long sigh, and turned to greet Su Qingjun before chatting idly. Lu Chen listened on the side, as if he did not exist. After some hypocritical pleasantries, Su Qingjun asked He, "Senior brother He, why did you call us over?" He waved his hand and said, "It's not a big deal. It's just that He Chongqing's death was very tragic, and some higher-ups in the sect couldn't stand it, so they gave the order to thoroughly investigate the matter. He paused for a moment, and his smile was a little modest, but also a little depressed, so much so that no one could tell what he was thinking in his heart. It just so happens that the two of you were in the flowing fragrance garden that day, and were also there when the quarrel happened. Lu Chun and Su Qingjun's faces suddenly darkened, and Su Qingjun said to He with a dark face, "Senior brother He, you called us over without any evidence. I'm afraid it's a little too much." He's expression did not change, and he said indifferently, "If the two of you have any opinions about me, you can go directly to sect leader Idle Month to complain. Once there's an order, I will naturally stop." This order would not be obtained, and Su Qingjun's heart was as clear as a mirror. She took a deep breath and said, "If that's the case, if there's anything, senior brother He, you can ask. But before that, I want to go see my good-for-nothing brother. Is that okay?" "I'm afraid that's not very convenient." He directly refused, and then said to Su Qingjun with great respect, "Su Junior sister, actually don't have to worry too much. We still have some questions to ask other than Master Su, to see if they are in cahoots with the evildoers of the evil faction." Su Qingjun snorted and said, "Anyway, you called us over. Are you suspecting our identities?" "That won't be the case." He smiled and said, "Even if I suspect anyone, I won't suspect you. But what needs to be done still needs to be done, in view of the fact that there are many evil faction spies in the cultivation world. It's really hard to guard against them. I was a little rude to the two of you. Please forgive me." Immediately after, he did not say any more superfluous words, and directly started to interrogate them. And in the middle of it, he even separated the two of them for a period of time. He did not ask many things, but the consecutive questions were somewhat difficult to answer, among which the most crucial one was the night He Changxing died, where was the person being interrogated. Originally, 3 members of the Su family were arrested, but after Su Wen and Su Qian explained where they went that day, they were released. Instead, Sumo, who had been hemming and hawing and refused to clearly state where she was that night, was directly detained. He seemed to really do what he said, and did not make things difficult for Su Qingjun, but when facing Lu Chen, he seemed to show another side. He started to interrogate Lu Chen where he was that night. Would there be anyone who could prove it? Lu Chen thought for a while, and realized that he would always be alone, unable to prove others, and unable to prove himself. He immediately became hostile and announced to Su Qingjun, "I'm going to keep this person for now and interrogate him." Su Qingjun argued with reason, and was unwilling to let Lu Chen stay, but he refused to let him go, and only said that he would not harm Lu Chen, but he really wanted to interrogate him. Until now, Sumo had not finished asking, so she did not let him go. Of course, Lu Chen was also unwilling to stay, but seeing that he was determined, he gave Su Qingjun a look, signaling her to calm down. With the advice from her master, Masato Kihara, Su Qingjun knew the vast and profound background behind this matter, and naturally felt a bit of respect. And Lu Chen was often away, who would really care about this? And the real reason why Lu Chen agreed to stay was actually because he was curious about this grave, the mysterious corpse watcher, and those dead people. He brought everyone to this gloomy grave for interrogation, and whether there were other hidden motives. Lu Chen suddenly wanted to see the face of the person who had been caught, and refused to let go. In the end, the two of them came together, but left alone. This scene made Su Qingjun feel a bit uncomfortable, and the gaze she stared at He was particularly unfriendly. He smiled bitterly, and did not explain much, and sent Su Qingjun away. In fact, if it was possible, he also wanted Su Qingjun to stay, but in this way, most people on Taiji's side would speak up, and the Su family would be completely enraged, and they might do anything. That kind of chaos was not what He wanted, nor was it what Immortal Idle Month and his master, Dukan Jinren, wanted. Lu Chen was brought to a dark room. In this gloomy place, because of this place's special purpose, even the room looked particularly scary. According to he was tired today, and asked Lu Chen to rest first and talk tomorrow. Lu Chen did not refute, and silently accepted He's words. Until he was in this dark room, and when he began to try to see and explore the surroundings, he suddenly heard a weak and painful voice from the corner of the room. containing fear. "Save me, save me, save me." Lu Chen immediately stopped and turned to look at the place where the voice came from. After a moment, he suddenly walked a few steps in that direction and came to a corner. Then he squatted down and looked at the figure who was huddled up in the corner. He sighed and said, "Young Master Su, how are you?" Chapter 193. To tell the truth, Lu Chen did not expect that he would be able to see Sumo so quickly and smoothly. Originally he thought that Sumo, as the only suspect and detained suspect, would at least be locked up in some secret place and strictly guarded. Who knew that he would actually appear to be somewhat careless, and directly locked the two of them together. This action was not normal. Or it should be said that it was not normal at all. Whether Sumo was the evil sex spy or not had not been determined. Casually locked up with other people, wouldn't it be dangerous? Also, that day when Su Qingjun returned to the Su family and made a big fuss, Lu Chen was tormented and seriously injured by Sumo and the rest. These things were not difficult to find out. Lu Chen did not believe that a scheming person like he would not know about it. And now that he was locked up with Sumo, there seemed to be some meaning in it. These thoughts flashed through Lu Chen's mind like a spark, but there was not much change in his expression. Only looking at the man who was hiding in the corner in the dark room and moaning for help, he could vaguely see that he was the once arrogant Sumo. Lu Chen greeted Sumo, but Sumo did not respond to him. Her mouth was still muttering those two simple words. Lu Chen frowned, squatted down in front of him, and saw clearly that Sumo had shrunk into a ball, buried her head on her knees, her hands behind her head, as if she was very afraid. Save me, sister, save me." Sumo was still speaking intermittently in a low voice. Her voice seemed to be trembling. Instead she did not respond to Lu Chen, who was very close at hand. Lu Chen reached out and gently patted Sumo's shoulder. Sumo's body shrank a little, but it seemed to be an instinctive reaction. There was no other movement. This situation seemed a little strange. Lu Chen stared at Sumo and did not speak. He fell into deep thought. After a while he suddenly stood up and looked around. This was a dark room. Most of the rooms in the martyr's tomb were like this. Because it was too dark, it was sometimes hard to tell how big the room was. And in this room, there was a place where the darkness was especially thick, right against the wall of the room. Lu Chen stared at the thick darkness, then looked at his surroundings. After a while, the corners of his mouth suddenly curled up. He sneered, and there seemed to be a hint of ridicule in his smile. By the time Su Qingjun returned to Flying Goose Terrace alone, the sky had already darkened. She was in a bad mood. All kinds of dark and strange scenes kept appearing in front of her eyes. She was a little worried, even more worried than before. She was worried about her brother, Sumo, and also worried about Lu Chen. As she walked on the mountain path, Su Qingjun made up her mind to go to the gloomy martyr's tomb again tomorrow morning. No matter what, she had to try her best to save them. Although there might be all kinds of inexplicable undercurrents behind this matter, it had nothing to do with Sumo and Lu Chen. When she walked up to Flying Goose Terrace, her body suddenly paused. In the cold night, she saw a black dog squatting alone in front of the wooden house, looking at the mountain path here. After a while, Atsu got up and slowly walked over. When it came to Su Qingjun's side, it first looked behind her. When it found that there was no one there, Atsu raised its head to look at Su Qingjun and softly barked. Su Qingjun did not have much contact with this black dog. Because Lu Chen insisted on bringing Atsu with him, she did not mind and let Atsu live on Flying Goose Terrace, and they only met a few times. But tonight, she felt that Atsu seemed to be a little different from usual, but she could not tell what was different. Perhaps it was because they had too little contact. Su Qingjun sighed and said to Atsu, "Are you waiting for Lu Chen, Atsu?" Atsu looked at her and wagged its tail. Because it was injured, it only had one eye and half of its tail left. When it wagged its tail, it looked a little funny. Looking at its one eye and the remaining scars on its face, it gave people a sense of tragedy. These two completely different feelings were strangely mixed on this black dog. Su Qingjun felt a little apologetic in her heart, but then she felt a little funny. Looking at Atsu, she did not know why, but she still felt a little uncomfortable. She softly said, "Lu Chen has been detained, he can't come back tonight." But I have already thought about it. I will go there tomorrow. No matter what they find out, as long as I can't confirm that he is the traitor, I will definitely bring him back, okay? Atsu quietly looked at Su Qingjun. The light in its only eye was dim and uncertain. The half of its tail behind it had unknowingly stopped. Su Qingjun saw that Atsu didn't respond for a long time. She didn't know if he understood her words, so she could only sigh softly. She then turned around and walked into the cave residence. She opened the stone door and walked in. The heavy stone door closed behind her, and the flying goose platform once again fell into silence. The night became colder. The black dog slowly stood up and walked to the edge of the cliff. It looked at the vast sea of clouds in silence. Its only eye lit up with a dark green light, like a crystal-clear gem, but also like the deep sea. It slowly raised its head and looked at the dark night sky. This night, the clouds were very thick, blocking the moonlight and the stars. It was as if there was only darkness left in this world. It stood there alone, the night wind getting tighter and colder. It looked up at the sky, its black fur swaying, and its dark green eyes shining. Suddenly, it raised its head and howled at the sky, at the night sky, at the dark clouds, or at the cold moon that could not be seen but must be hidden high up in the sky. Awoo! The mournful howl echoed above the sea of clouds, lingering for a long time. Su Qingjun did get up early the next morning. After dressing up, she walked out of the cave, ready to go to the cemetery. When she left the flying goose platform, she glanced at the wooden house, but she did not see Atsu, so she thought that maybe the black dog was still sleeping. Su Qingjun got up very early, but on the same morning, there was someone else who got up even earlier than her. He walked through the long street of Kunwa City, which had not yet become lively. Although the street was not lively, there were already some pedestrians. The fat old ma yawned. He saw a stall selling breakfast on the side of the road ahead, so he walked over and sat down. This kind of roadside stall, of course, sold food for mortals in the secular world. There was no such thing as food made of various spiritual materials, so ordinary cultivators would not patronize this place. However, old Ma was obviously more like a mortal. He casually sat down, ordered some steaming hot breakfast and hot porridge, and ate them in big mouthfuls. His forehead was slightly sweaty, and it was only then that he seemed to heave a sigh of relief, looking a bit more comfortable. "It's so cold tonight," he said with some emotion. He then turned his head to the north and glanced at the majestic Kunlun mountain range. Even the tall city walls of Kunwa City couldn't block the rise and fall of the majestic mountain range. Old Ma pursed his lips and said to himself, "I've done what I should. You better not bother me. Let's see what you do next." He was in a daze for a while, then he called the stall owner to pay the bill. The stall owner was an old man, so he came over to settle the bill. When he turned around to leave, he suddenly saw Old Ma's hand, so he reminded Old Ma, "Sir, your hand is bleeding." Old Ma looked down and saw some blood between the fingers of his left hand. He immediately smiled and said to the stall owner, "Ah, I didn't expect to cut my hand. Thank you, boss. I'll go bandage it later." The old man chuckled, put away the bowls and chopsticks and walked away. Old Ma stood up and walked back to the street. As he walked, he calmly wiped his left hand under his sleeve. That trace of blood was wiped on it. Then it disappeared from his hand. He happily and contentedly walked forward, just like an ordinary person. At this time, the street gradually became lively and more people appeared. No one noticed a fat man with bloodstains on his hand gradually walked into the crowd and disappeared. He did not sleep well that night. The yin energy in the righteous grave was too heavy. It was really not suitable for ordinary people to live in. Even for a foundation establishment realm cultivator like him, living here for a long time would also feel uncomfortable. If one lived in this kind of shady place for a long time, perhaps even one's temperament would become strange, just like that corpse watcher. He was actually curious about the corpse watcher. This skinny and shriveled old man was mysterious and obviously powerful. He also seemed to have some unexplainable grudges with the newly promoted Yuanying Jinren, Dongfang Tao, which made him even more unfathomable. But right now, these were not the things that he was most concerned about. He was recommended by Dukan Jinren to sect leader Idle Month Jinren. He was wholeheartedly pursuing that evil faction spy murder case. However, this matter had been dragged on for a long time. He was actually feeling a great deal of pressure. And because of this, he had no choice but to gradually turn his methods more intense. It was already too late to use the previous gentle and tactful methods. Teacher and sect leader Reverend, they could not continue to indulge like that. He felt wronged. This evil faction spy's methods were ruthless, but unusually cautious. Even with his very familiar experience with the evil faction, after so long, he still could not find any reliable clues. But in his heart he did not blame those two teachers. Without them, he would still be in closed-door training and reflecting on his mistakes. Without them, he would not have been able to come out and do things so early. He even felt a little ashamed and felt that he had let down his teacher and sect leader Reverend. So, today, he felt that the reason why he could not calm down last night was because he did not do a good job. Then today, he must think of a way to carefully interrogate the two people who were currently detained, and strive to find out something. If there were any results, based on this merit, he would definitely be able to let his younger brother, Gang, return to the Kunlun party. When he thought of this, his somewhat heavy heart lightened up a lot. When he strode out of the room, he probably thought of his younger brother. The corners of his mouth carried a trace of a smile. But the moment he walked to the courtyard, he was suddenly stunned. On the grave's black main entrance, the room door was open, but he did not know when. But there was a black dog standing outside. The black dog was staring at him. Chapter 194. Of course, he had never seen one before. Or rather, even if he had, he would not have cared about such an ordinary black dog. However, when he saw the black dog, he was still slightly shocked. He was curious as to why a dog would appear in such a shadowy place where all living creatures avoided it. He was also surprised at the mutilations and scars on the black dog's body. This was a dog that had clearly been severely injured. Not only was it covered in scars, its one eye and half a tail made it even uglier and more frightening. He was also a normal person. When he first saw the black dog, he frowned and his eyes were filled with disgust. However, very soon He's gaze changed slightly and his expression softened. This change was not because he had suddenly become kind and compassionate, but because he had suddenly thought of his younger brother, Gang. Because he had been surrounded by a pack of black jackals in the disorientated lands, Gang had been severely injured and disfigured. Now, after a series of twists and turns, he did not look like a human or a ghost. As his older brother, his heart ached for him. For some reason, when he saw this black dog, he suddenly thought of Gang and felt an inexplicable sense of compassion. So he did not immediately chase the black dog away. Instead, he stood and watched for a while before walking over. The black dog looked at his figure in silence, and did not move. It did not retreat, nor did it hide. There was a strange light flowing in its single eye as it stared at He's figure. He walked to the door and glanced at the black dog, then looked outside the door to confirm that there was no one outside. It seemed that no one had deliberately brought this dog here. However, this made it even more strange. After staying in the righteous grave for several days, he had long noticed that the Qi in this place was extremely strong. It was the enemy of almost all living creatures. In this righteous grave, there was not even a mouse or a cockroach, let alone wild beasts or birds. Could it be that because this dog was black, it was not afraid of this pitch-black righteous grave? This ridiculous thought flashed through He's mind. Even he himself felt bored, but he still had a good impression of this black dog. He waved his hand at the black dog and said, "This is not a place for you. Leave quickly." As he spoke, he made a gesture to drive it away. The black dog took 2 steps back. Although it was still staring at perhaps because did not show too much hostility before, and even had a little bit of gentleness to it, the black dog did not react too aggressively to It glanced at the courtyard of the righteous grave, and seemed a little hesitant. The darkness and the strange atmosphere inside made it very uncomfortable, and it did not want to go in. So after a moment of hesitation, the black dog retreated more than 10 feet away, and found a large tree to lie down, as if it was waiting for something. He glanced over there and shook his head. He was too lazy to care about it. He couldn't even take care of the person, so who would have the time to care about the dog? He turned and walked into the depths of the courtyard. The door to the room where Sumo and Lu Chun, who had just arrived yesterday, was still locked. In the darkness on the other side, the corpse walked out of the shadows like a ghost. He nodded at him and looked at the tightly shut door again. There was a hint of worry on his face as he asked the corpse, "Senior, will they be all right?" The corpse's face was haggard and his expression seemed to always be as rigid as ever. After hearing He's question, he only replied faintly, "They won't die." He shook his head and seemed to smile bitterly. He then sighed and asked, "Did you find anything?" The corpse replied, "Under the influence of the mind-manipulating spell, their souls were agitated and injured, causing them to fall into a terrifying illusion. Their words are definitely true, so it shouldn't be them." He was silent. Seeing that the corpse ignored him, he casually waved in the direction of the door. A cold wind suddenly rose and swept across the courtyard. The door on the other side suddenly opened with a squeak. He frowned and walked into the room. After a while, he dragged two people out, one in each hand, and placed them on the ground. The two people were, of course, Sumo and Lu Chun. Between the two, Lu Chun's face was ashen and his eyes were lifeless. He sat on the ground with a blank gaze, unable to even focus on He and the corpse. Occasionally he would mutter a few words in a low voice, but it was unclear what he was saying. As for Sumo, his condition was even worse than Lu Chun, probably because he had stayed here for a longer period of time. His entire person looked like an idiot, drooling and his eyes slanted. He looked completely different from that young master from before. He took a glance at Lu Chun, and then most of his attention was still on Sumo. After watching for a long while, he suddenly stood up and said to the corpse, "Senior, this time many thanks for your help. But I think this matter should end here. As for how to track the evil sex evil people, I will think of a way myself." The corpse's expression did not change. He only glanced at him and coldly said, "I owe you a little favor. That's why I helped you. Since you don't need it, naturally I won't care anymore." He sighed and said, "The main thing is that Senior's mind-manipulating spell is really too overbearing. I'm afraid if this goes on, these two people's minds will be completely destroyed. That odd job disciple doesn't matter, but Sumo is after all a person with a family background. It's not good to mess around. As you wish. But remember after this time, don't come and bother me again." The corpse said indifferently. Then he turned around and walked into the depths of the courtyard. Before he left, his ghost claw-like palm waved at Sumo and Lu Chun. A few rays of gray light floated up from their bodies and followed him into the darkness. Sumo and Lu Chun's bodies suddenly shook. A moment later, their heads tilted and they both fainted on the ground. He walked over to take their pulse. He felt that these two people's pulse had gradually calmed down. He nodded his head in relief. After all, the Kunlun party was a place with rules. It did not allow him to act recklessly. If he really wrongly accused a good person and killed someone, even his master and the sect leader might not be able to protect him. After the mind-manipulating spell was lifted, between Sumo and Lu Chun did not seem to have changed much. On the other hand, Sumo's complexion was much better. At least the idiotic look of her crooked mouth and slanted eyes was gone. Her facial expression gradually returned to normal, but she still did not look too good. After about an hour, he suddenly heard a call from the entrance of the martyr's tomb. "Senior brother," he turned around and saw Su Qingjun standing at the doorstep with a solemn expression. She was looking in his direction. Then, her gaze fell on the two people lying on the ground. She immediately looked surprised and worried. He cupped his hands at her and said, "Good morning, junior sister Su." Su Qingjun walked over slowly. She seemed to still be suppressing her emotions to keep calm. She said, "What happened to them?" He said, "They were just released to get some fresh air." Su Qingjun's expression turned cold. She said, "What did you do to them?" He shook his head and said, "I didn't do anything. But I have already asked what I needed to ask. The two of them should have nothing to do with He Changxing's death. So when they wake up later, you can take them back." Su Qingjun was startled. Then, her face revealed a happy expression. At this moment, there was a sudden groan from the ground. Lu Chen was the first to wake up. Not long after, Sumo also woke up. He looked around blankly. His eyes were still a little scattered. After a while he seemed to suddenly find Su Qingjun. His expression suddenly changed. He rushed over and hugged Su Qingjun. He shouted, "Sister, sister." Su Qingjun showed a pained expression. She reached out and patted his back to comfort him. At the same time, she looked at Lu Chen. She found that although Lu Chen's expression was a little strange, he could still control himself. He stood up shakily. Their eyes met. Lu Chen grinned, indicating that he was fine. Su Qingjun took a deep breath. She looked at He and said coldly, "Senior brother He, since you are fine, can we go?" He nodded and said, "Forgive me for not seeing you off." Su Qingjun supported Sumo. Lu Chen also looked a little weak, but he still walked alone. When they walked out of the gate of the martyr's grave, a black shadow suddenly walked out from a corner in front of them. The black dog stood quietly on the side of the road. It did not look at Su Qingjun and Sumo. It only looked at Lu Chen. Then it gently wagged its tail and walked towards Lu Chen. When Lu Chen saw Atsu, his expression changed slightly. He then glanced at Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun shook her head and said, "I didn't bring it here. I don't know how Atsu came here by itself." After a moment of silence, Lu Chen nodded and said, "I know. You can go first. I'll go back to the Flying Goose Terrace later." Su Qingjun hesitated for a moment. But Sumo's situation was indeed worse. She also had to send him back to the Su family in Kunwa City as soon as possible, so she couldn't care about Lu Chen now. So in the end she softly said, "I'll take Sumo back. After I settle him down, I'll come back to see you as soon as possible." Lu Chen smiled and said, "I'm fine. Don't worry." Su Qingjun responded and supported Sumo as they left. In the martyr's grave, the aura of darkness seemed to be everywhere, lingering around him and Atsu. Lu Chen squatted in front of Atsu and looked at Atsu. Atsu's only eye was also looking at him. He didn't know why, but he felt that the light in Atsu's eyes was somewhat different from before. But he didn't care. He just smiled and stroked Atsu's head, saying, "You've become smarter, stupid dog." Atsu silently shook its head. Lu Chen stood up and said to it, "Let's go home." The man and the dog walked outside. Just as they were about to walk out of the darkness, an anxious figure suddenly ran over from a distance. His face was filled with anger and anxiety. He rushed past them and ran into the depths of the darkness. Lu Chen's footsteps paused, and he turned around to look at that person's back. Then he expressionlessly turned around and continued to walk out, stepping into the warm light. Chapter 195. The bustling streets of Kunwa City were filled with people coming and going as usual. It was as peaceful and prosperous as if all living things were happy. In the distance, Kunlun Mountain was lofty and majestic. The sun was warm on Fian platform. Lu Chen was lying on the bed of his wooden house, quietly looking at the scenery outside the window. Far away from the hustle and bustle of the city, in the small courtyard of the Black Hill Pavilion, Old Ma was sitting there. He had changed his clothes, carried a basin of water, and was carefully washing his hands. The bloodstains made the water a little red. He looked at the red color with a strange expression. He stretched out a finger and gently drew a few strokes on the reddish spots in the water. It seemed like he was stirring randomly, but it also seemed like he was writing a word. Faint traces of blood gently circled around his fingertips, floating and dispersing in the water, so that the word couldn't take shape. Soon even the blood itself disappeared. Old Ma raised his head and looked at the sky. After a moment of silence, he pulled a piece of cloth from the side and carefully wiped his palm clean, not leaving the slightest trace. The morning wind blew through Kunwa City, bringing with it a slight chill. A group of people gathered outside the gate of a certain house. There was a faint smell of blood in the air. It was coming from that house. The crowd of onlookers looked a little excited, as if they had lived ordinary lives for too long and finally had a lively scene to watch. However, from beginning to end, no one tried to enter the courtyard. Who was a fool these days? Being wise to stay out of trouble was the right thing to do. Later, a figure suddenly flew over from afar and rushed into the house like an arrow leaving the bow. Because his speed was so fast, there was even a sharp whistling sound as he broke through the air, making people unable to clearly see his figure and face. Immediately after, several figures rushed over and landed at the gate of the house. The difference was that they all clearly appeared in front of the crowd. The crowd of onlookers suddenly became restless because the people standing guard in front of the gate were cultivators, wearing the uniform of Kunlun party disciples. The person who rushed in the front with the fastest speed was He. The place he rushed into was the residence of his younger brother, He Gang, several times before. When he received the news and rushed here, when he smelled the faint smell of blood, his heart slowly sank until he rushed into the courtyard and saw the bloody scene. He Gang was lying on the ground in the middle of the courtyard, already dead. There was also a bloodstain on his side, from his bedroom to the place where he died. It seemed that he had struggled to crawl from there. He had lost a lot of blood, so his skin looked a little pale, which made his already disfigured face look even more terrifying. He Gang's eyes were still wide open, as if he had died with a grievance, but no one knew what he had seen before he died. He stood there stiffly, looking at the corpse on the ground in a daze. Just a few days ago, he was still sitting together with him, looking forward to the beautiful days in the future, and even exaggeratedly thinking about what kind of good sister-in-law he should find for his brother in the future. Sometimes he really thought that he and his younger brother could live well like this, that he would become successful and famous, that he would be successful in his cultivation, and that he would take good care of him for the rest of his life. The past flashed past his mind like scenes, from the lonely childhood, the brothers who depended on each other for survival, to supporting each other for so many years, from when he was young to now, from when he was young to when he was mature. The only thing that never changed was his smile, Big Brother. At this moment, like a death knell, the sound of Big Brother rang again and again in his ears. He only felt that his heart was beating crazily, as if it was about to explode. He thought that he was going crazy, shouting and yelling, but in the end he could not make a sound. He just staggered forward, and then knelt down beside his younger brother's corpse. The smell of blood assaulted his nostrils. He suddenly felt like vomiting. His hand trembled a little, and he slowly reached over and gently touched He Gang's head. His younger brother's head shook slightly, but there was no reaction. Where he touched it, his fingertips felt a trace of coldness that seemed to seep into his bones. He clenched his teeth, his mouth silently contorting for a moment. Then he lowered his head, his entire body tensed up and trembled. He forcefully swallowed all the anger and pain. He's dead, he's dead, he's dead. There was a bitter smile on his face, but there were no tears, only desolation. Then he gently used his hand to wipe his younger brother's eyes, wanting him to at least rest in peace. But after trying a few times, he found that the eyes could not close. He slowly retracted his hand. "All right," he said softly. "Just open your eyes, Big Brother promises you. I will help you get revenge." He Gang's face did not change. The matter of having a spirit after death seemed to be just a legend after all. He lowered his head and was silent for a very long time. Then he quietly began to help his younger brother tidy up his body, smoothing his clothes and straightening his body. Then he found that He Gang had a hand under his body. He tried to pull his hand out, but when he flipped over He Gang's body halfway, his body suddenly trembled, and his movements abruptly stopped. After a moment he relaxed his movements, lightly pulling He Gang's body to the side, revealing the piece of ground he was originally pressing down on. One of He Gang's hands was still there, his fingers stained with dark red blood, using blood to write a crooked and terrifying character on the ground. Su. That crooked character was like a sharp blade that was stabbed into his chest, that dripping blood, imprinted in his eyes like a burning scarlet flame. He stared at that character, the muscles at the corners of his eyes twitching slightly. At this time, the sound of footsteps came from behind him. It was the junior brothers that he brought with him walking in. He seemed to want to say something, but he quickly closed his mouth. A trace of a desolate smile appeared at the corners of his mouth, and then it quickly disappeared. His face became gloomy, and in the end, indifferent. He stood up and with a step, he stepped on that character. The several Kunlun disciples next to him walked over. When they saw the bloody scene, they all had frightened, angry, and unbearable expressions on their faces. One after another, they came up to comfort Hee. He slowly nodded, and without saying anything else he only said in a soft voice, "Thank you, junior brothers, for helping me." As he said this, he slowly walked forward, but as he lifted his foot, there seemed to be an infinitely heavy pressure on his shoulder. When he took a step forward, a dazzling trail of blood appeared under his foot, and it was a bloody mess. Some people helped him to the side to rest, while others sighed and prepared to clean up the mess. In the middle of it all, they glanced at the ground. In the middle of it, there was nothing but fresh blood on the ground. Only when the sun shone down, it illuminated the bloody and tragic shadow. There were still 13 days until the next full moon night. There was some turmoil in the Kunlun party, and it was about Hee. His only relative, his younger brother He Gang, was suddenly killed in Kunwa City, and his body was thrown in the courtyard. When the news came, Hee was so grieved that he almost couldn't do anything. So the murder case of He Changsheng, which caused a lot of trouble, suddenly quieted down. Dukan Jinren, who cherished his disciple, once again summoned Hee back in the name of closed-door meditation. He went to the sect master, Reverend Idle Month, to ask for forgiveness, and took all the responsibility. But Reverend Idle Month was also open-minded, and didn't really pursue the matter. In any case, they were all from the same sect. If someone was to blame, they could only blame the devil cult's evil man for being too treacherous and cunning. It was just that in the sect, everyone seemed to hate the devil cult to the bone and felt indignant about the injustice. But in private, there were some whispers that couldn't be brought to the surface. He Gang didn't die earlier or later, but he died when Hee was investigating the murder case on a large scale. And he died after Hee detained the Su family? The water was deep. Many people said so, with a meaningful smile on their faces. The Su family, on the other hand, remained silent. Originally, when they brought Sumo back, they were indignant and wanted to fight back and take revenge. But suddenly, overnight, all the Su family were directly locked up at home by Su Tianhe, and were not allowed to go out easily. The atmosphere in the Kunlun party was a little strange, but in any case, things that didn't come out publicly, everyone could pretend that it didn't happen. Life still had to go on. When the moon at night began to slowly become full from the smallest crescent, Lucien also went out several times in the middle of the night, hoping to encounter the strange three-eyed bug again, but he didn't find anything. That night really seemed like a dream. Everything seemed to be the same as before. Nothing had changed. Until one night, he suddenly saw Atsu lying on the windowsill, suddenly raised his head, and howled at the dark sky, and heard that mournful long cry. Lucien suddenly sat up. After the long cry, Atsu turned to look at him, and suddenly jumped out of the window. Without any hesitation, Lucien directly jumped out, and then followed Atsu, all the way to the forest behind the mountain of Flying Goose Terrace. The dark forest emitted a deep darkness under the night sky, and the old and sturdy trees were like tall giants, but Atsu didn't seem to have any fear, and directly ran into the forest. Lucien followed, ran all the way, and gradually came to the depths of the forest. Then somewhere, Atsu suddenly stopped, and Lucien also slowed down and stood beside it. He first looked at it, and then looked around. It was a little dark, but he could see the shadow of a big stone in front of him, and there seemed to be some things around it. Lucien's expression suddenly changed. He took a few steps forward, and then gradually saw the things there. Beside the stone, there were many corpses of birds and small animals. All of them were bitten to death. He suddenly turned back and stared at Atsu, only to see that in the darkness, the dim light in Atsu's eyes gradually lit up, and gradually became brighter, like a dark green flame. Chapter 196. Lucien's eyes met Atsu's. In this quiet night, in this dark forest, there was a night wind blowing above the trees, and there was a slight rustling sound of the branches and leaves swaying. There was also a glimmer of light, like a green flame, much brighter than the eyes he had seen in the past. There was not much smell of blood around. Even if there were many corpses of birds and beasts, perhaps the blood had dried up after a long time. There was a low gasp from Atsu's mouth, as if it was hiding a trace of pain. Its eyes began to change, with a hint of madness, as if at this moment, There were suddenly two thoughts suddenly colliding in its mind, tearing at each other crazily. The green light also became unstable, sometimes bright, sometimes weak, like a candle flame swaying in the wind. Lucien looked at it quietly, his face cold, and there was a trace of coldness in his eyes. But this night, Atsu seemed to be really different from before. It was struggling, fluctuating between quiet and violent emotions, and the darkness around it gradually became turbulent, surging wave by wave. In the quiet forest, it seemed that even the sound of a needle falling on the ground could be heard. No one would have thought that in this quiet night, they would suddenly confront each other here. The darkness gradually gathered into a tide, and wave after wave washed over. The green flame in Atsu's eyes became brighter and brighter, as if it was going to explode in the next moment. The mountain forest seemed to be silent. All the creatures were holding their breaths, and even the trees were cowering. Only in the depths of the darkness, in a ghostly place, there seemed to be a demonic gaze staring at this place, revealing a look of excitement. Suddenly, Lucien suddenly turned around, and without any warning, rushed into the darkness on the other side of the forest. Atsu, who was squatting and growling in a low voice, suddenly raised its head, and the green light in its eyes flickered, as if it was a little shocked at this moment. In the darkness, it was as silent as the sea, but after a moment, the darkness suddenly burst like a raging wave, and suddenly scattered. Low roars and sharp whistles mixed together, and all kinds of strange sounds with a creepy aura burst out. Even Atsu subconsciously took 2 steps back, and at the same time, it seemed that its attention was diverted, and the green flame in its eyes slowly dimmed. Bang! Someone groaned in pain in the darkness. 2 figures were thrown out together, but they did not separate in midair. Instead, they were still fighting, and the various moves they used were all extremely vicious and merciless. Every move was fatal, and every move was bloody. The figures descended from the sky. One of them was Lucien. At this moment, black light flashed in his eyes, and his aura was completely unleashed. It was filled with a chilling, killing intent. The normally harmless errand disciple was nowhere to be found. Right now he was clearly a cold-blooded killer. And opposite him was a petite figure, who clearly had an unearthly beautiful face, but the ruthlessness of her attacks was like the most terrible evil spirit. It was White Lotus. The battle between these 2 people was practically a repeat of the last time. They didn't possess any of the dignity and grace of cultivators, and all they utilized were ruthless, sinister, and ferocious methods. They stopped at nothing for the sake of killing each other as soon as possible. Blood instantly flew, and drops of blood stained the white and beautiful face of White Lotus, like the red dew on the beautiful flower petals in the morning. And it was shocking. When she fell, she had already scratched Lucien's chest, and her white fingertips instantly whistled up with wind and snow, and in just a moment, she had already pierced Lucien's chest. However, the wind and snow only stopped here, because almost at the same time, a hand rushed out from the darkness like an evil spirit, and had already grabbed White Lotus's slender neck. Lucien was like a roaring evil spirit, wildly rushing up, and White Lotus moaned in pain. Her fingers trembled, and the ice and snow exploded on Lucien's chest, and the countless fragments of ice crystals all turned the color of blood. Lucien let out a low roar, and his face twisted, as if his whole body had fallen into an ice cellar. But at this moment, it seemed that all the blood in his body was cold, and he was isolated from all the pain, ignoring it. Those 5 terrible fingers flickered with black flames, and in an instant, they burned into White Lotus's flesh and blood. White Lotus screamed, and her whole body was grabbed by the neck by Lucien, and with a loud bang, her body heavily hit the trunk of a large tree. Suddenly, the surroundings trembled, and countless leaves fell like rain. The murderous rain in the darkness. It was as if the air had suddenly quieted down, and all the noise had died down. Gradually, the sound of falling leaves could be heard, as well as Lucien's slightly pained panting, and White Lotus's already twisted breathing. The green light in Atsu's eyes had almost completely disappeared, and it seemed to be stunned by the sudden scene just now. Only now did it react, and then it hesitantly stood up, and slowly walked a few steps towards Lucien and White Lotus. As it got closer, it could clearly see that in the still falling leaves, Lucien slightly lowered his head, as if he was sucking in cold air, and coughed softly. His chest was a mess, and his right hand was straight in front of him. He still grabbed White Lotus's neck, and pushed her against the tree trunk, so that her petite body was suspended in the air, and her face was pale, as if she was about to suffocate to death. In the forest, there was only silence. Atsu looked at the two strange people, and hesitantly took a step forward. Suddenly, Lu-chen turned his head and looked at it. His empty left hand suddenly raised, and he pointed a finger at it. He pointed at it condescendingly. Along with this movement, a few scalp-numbing cracking sounds came from his body, like the sound of ice cracking. Then, a gush of blood gushed out from his chest. Atsu immediately stopped in his tracks. It looked up at Lu-chen, and that finger was just above it. Deep in the man's eyes, there seemed to be wild black flames burning. An endless black tide swept over. He stood in the darkness, like a god or a devil. All the hair on Atsu's body seemed to stand up in an instant. After a moment it lowered its head, and slowly lay down under that finger, showing all its submission and awe. Lu-chen took a deep look at the black dog, then turned his head, and looked at White Lotus in front of him. His eyes were as violent as a demon, and as cold as the ice on his chest. He stared at this fairy-like little girl, and after a moment he said coldly, "Is it fun?" White Lotus was suspended in the air under that hand that seemed to be cast from iron. Her face was in pain, but for some reason, she was still smiling when she looked at Lu-chen's face while panting. "It's fun," she said, looking straight at Lu-chen, and there seemed to be a hint of provocation in the depths of her eyes. Lu-chen's 5 fingers tightened again, and White Lotus groaned in pain. Her suspended body twisted a little, like a thirsty fish thrown onto the shore. "You are forcing me to kill you," Lu-chen said coldly. "You don't dare to kill me." Almost immediately after his words, White Lotus immediately responded. Then her legs kicked a few more times, as if she was finally unable to breathe, and her body began to soften. Lu-chen silently looked at this strange girl who seemed to be a mix of light and darkness, beautiful and fierce angel and demon. After a while he suddenly let go of his hand. White Lotus let out a soft cry, and her whole body fell down. After falling to the ground, she covered her neck with both hands, and began to desperately gasp for breath. After a while, she finally calmed down. Lu-chen looked at her quietly, then sighed and said, "You are right, I don't dare to kill you." The darkness in the forest at this time had gradually calmed down, no longer surging like the tide, nor was there that kind of fierceness. Instead, there was a hint of quiet gentleness. Lu-chen walked to the side of Atsu, and very naturally sat down on the ground next to it. At this moment, all the different aura on his body had disappeared, and he seemed to have changed back to the usual gentle and useless odd-job disciple. However, Atsu seemed to be more familiar with Lu-chen's aura. It gently leaned over, using its head to rub against Lu-chen's thigh, and then nestled beside him, just like before, intimately, as if nothing had happened. On the other side, White Lotus also walked over after resting for a while. After that life and death battle, she seemed to suddenly forget everything, just like Atsu, as if nothing had happened, and naturally sat opposite Lu-chen and Atsu. The atmosphere was a little vaguely strange. Lu-chen raised his head to look at her, and said, "I thought we had already made it clear before." White Lotus said, "What do you mean?" Lu-chen said, "Well, water does not interfere with the river water. As long as we stay away from each other, we will be safe." White Lotus thought for a moment and said, "I originally thought so, until I saw Atsu again." Atsu raised its head to look at her from Lu-chen's side. Lu-chen stretched out his hand to press its head, and touched the fur on its head, and said, White Lotus stared at him, as if trying to find some clues from Lu-chen's face, and said, "This dog has the aura of the blood food secret method." Lu-chen shook his head and flatly said, "There is no such thing." White Lotus sneered, "You think you can dismiss me with this sentence? I will not be wrong." Lu-chen was silent for a moment, and suddenly said, "Don't forget that the world is big, and there is not only one blood food secret method. There may be other magical powers that you don't know. And even if it is the blood food secret method, it is not unique to you. On what basis do you make wild guesses?" White Lotus said, Of course I know this. In fact, even if this dog really has the blood food secret method, it doesn't matter to me. But the most important thing is that this dog did not go crazy or die after being used the blood food secret method. She sneered and looked at Lu Chen and said, "Don't tell me you don't know what this means?" Lu Chen gently touched Atsu's head, but fell silent and did not say a word for a long time. You're tuning into the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.